Today I have a very unique guest on Sushasan. He's not a career civil servant. He's not a typical politician. He's also not a professional on the outside who's working with the government. Instead, he's an outsider who's now become part of the government and is trying to make transformative change happen from within. I'm talking about Jasmine Shah. Jasmine is the Vice Chairperson of the Dialogue and Development Commission of the Government of Delhi, which is a think tank behind a lot of initiatives that we see the Delhi government doing. In this episode of Sushasan, Jasmine talks about air pollution, about women's safety, about outcome-based budgeting, and many, many more things. He also talks about his journey from small town Silvassa in Dadra and Nagar Haveli to IIT Madras, to the corporate world, to the social impact space, and finally holding an office at a cabinet rank in the Delhi government. Don't miss out this episode of Sushasan. Hi Jasmine, welcome to Sushasan.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me here.
Two reasons, Jasmine, I'm really looking forward to this specific conversation between us. One is that all the earlier guests that I've hosted on Sushasan have been either career civil servants who have done transformative change from within the system, or they've been professionals who are engaging closely with the system and trying to create large-scale impact. But yours is a very unique kind of this thing where you're an outsider who's now inside the government and is really driving change from within, right? So that's a very different and unique. You're a professional like a lot of us, but you've kind of in this space now from driving change in the system. And the second reason is that one of the primary objectives of doing Sushasan, this podcast, is the bright young talent out there, right? Whose heart beats for India, but somewhere they're kind of sitting on the fence and not taking the plunge. To really commit their professional lives either partially or fully to the impact space. उसके कई कारण हैं, या तो they feel there's a lot of risk involved, there's an opportunity cost, the pathways are not clear, it looks very distant कि करना तो चाहते हैं कुछ देश के लिए लेकिन कैसे करें, उसको clarity नहीं है. But I think you are somebody who will be relatable to them, not somebody who's very distant. You're not a typical politician, you're not a civil servant, you are kind of someone like them who's really made the right choices at different points in time and therefore are able to do what you're able to do today from within the government. So I think if even a handful of them looking at this conversation, hearing this conversation can get motivated and kind of take the plunge, I think I'll consider this successful. So really,
I think it's a very noble objective, and I'll be very glad if people find whatever we are going to talk about useful, especially in making a long-term career choice.
Yeah. तो बहुत सारी बातें करने के लिए हैं, तो काम की भी बात करेंगे एंड देन फिर आपकी जर्नी की भी बात करेंगे. सो आई स्टार्ट ऑफ विद वर्क पहले. You are the Vice Chairperson of the DDC, the Dialogue and Development Commission of the Government of Delhi. It's a think tank associated with the Government of Delhi, which is very unique. So states generally don't have this. Government of India has the Niti Aayog, which serves a certain purpose, but there's a very unique experiment that is happening and successfully happening in Delhi. The Chief Minister is the chairperson of the DDC. So thoda sa if you can explain what was the background and the context in which DDC was set up and what's the mandate that it has.
ठीक है. So पहले मैं बता दूं कि जो DDC है, Dialogue and Development Commission, you're very right in saying कि ये किसी भी state का ये पहला एक तरीके का अपना यूनिक इंस्टीट्यूशन है. This does not exist before 2015. In 2015, when Arvind Kejriwal government came to power in Delhi, तो पहली बार जब आम आदमी पार्टी की सरकार बनी थी, there was a extended series of consultations that had happened with various stakeholders in the society. That was called as Delhi Dialogues. And that is how the 70-point manifesto, which a lot of people in Delhi would remember at that time, was prepared. And it actually was reflective about the concerns of every stakeholder in the society. तो एक बार जब सरकार बन गई तो अरविंद केजरीवाल जी का सोचना था कि just because we have formed the government, there is no reason to break this chain of communication between us and different stakeholders of the society. Who are these different stakeholders? Youth, could be women, it could be the different RWAs, it could be the industry, it could be more niche disadvantaged groups. And that is how the idea of DDC was born. That जो भी चीज़ें हमने वादे करे थे, whatever promises that we had made, even to implement these promises, it will be unfair if we do this in closed, government office and, air-conditioned office, as they like to say. So, people have shared their pain points with the government. That's how they elected the chief minister. But to even implement them, you will need far more consultation, and this is sometimes missed during policy, that आप design stage पे थोड़ा policy consultation कर लेते हो, but when it comes to implement, that's why we see in India that we have excellent policy reports, but implementation में सारी चीजें fail हो जाती है, and therefore DDC was born. In brief, the idea was that this will act not just as the think tank in terms of do research, present solutions to different policy problems, which DDC does, but this will act as a bridge institution between the government. See, the government tends to be a little insulated क्योंकि बहुत administratively most governments are overwhelmed. We are a large country, heavy population, public services, basics deliver करने में ही सबका time चला जाता है. So who will do this consultations which actually are painstaking and are time consuming? So we became this bridge institution that कभी भी कुछ नया अगर शुरू होता है दिल्ली सरकार में, if it's a flagship or a big program, and typically things which departments have not dealt with traditionally, then that is given to DDC, and we do as many consultations are required, and we design those points.
Got it. And that's why the word dialogue also there is very important.
Dialogue and development. So we say that dialogue is the precursor to development, and therefore dialogue and
Interesting. Whenever we are sitting as friends, or generally you kind of sit down, और अलग-अलग cities की अगर दिल्ली में बात होती, इंडिया में बात होती है, तो दिल्ली से associated हमेशा two things come up. Right. One is, and two challenges come. There are positive things also, but there are two challenges that come up. एक बात होती है air pollution की, which is a relatively recent last 5, 7, 8 years kind of a phenomena, because it's become very stark. It's not that it was great earlier. And second, which is perennial thing, which is women's safety. Right. ये दो चीज़ों में हमेशा Delhi kind of takes a back foot, and you're debating Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, and this is Bangalore में traffic है, Bombay has its own things, but Delhi has these two things. And I know that both of these areas are topics are things which DDC has very, very kind of closely worked on. You have worked on over the last few years.
Yeah.
So एक एक करके दोनों की बात करते हैं, and start off with air pollution first.
बिल्कुल.
So air pollution में if you were to like classical kind of as a professional to break down the problem statement.
Yeah.
कि yes, pollution है, but what are the sources through which this pollution is happening in Delhi? And at a macro level, what's the strategy that the government of Delhi has?
Right.
Something could be short term, something could be long term, but overall, breaking down the air pollution problem statement, we'll start with that and then we'll deep dive also.
Absolutely. So I think पहले कुछ ground truths define कर लेते हैं, because sometimes people jump into either blaming or off the cuff solutions without realizing कि ground truths क्या है. दिल्ली का number one ground truth है, and this is substantiated by multiple studies by organizations like CEW है, TERI है. These are some of the renowned think tanks in the environment space. Delhi, the local sources of pollution, जो दिल्ली में pollution पैदा करते हैं, that contributes only 30% to Delhi's pollution. 70% is coming from the regional sources of pollution.
Okay.
That is a very important thing to understand. Similarly, if you take one city like a Noida or a Gurgaon, वहाँ पे भी वही सच्चाई होगी कि उसका जो inherent contribution है वो 30-40% होगा, बाकी सारा बाहर से आ रहा है. And therefore, it tells you that to solve a problem like air pollution, no one city can fight it alone. It must be a regional approach. It must be probably a pan-North India approach. Okay, that's true. And I'll come to it when we talk about the solution. But ये कहना बहुत important है.
And just to understand that a little better, Jasmine, तो जो 60-70% बाहर से है, वो भी, it's not that all of it is agriculture. There are multiple things.
Multiple sources. I'll come to the breakup of. So now, forget this 30-70, right? As I said, कि दिल्ली के elected government के अंदर the levers that you have of change is just 30%.
Got it.
Okay. Well, you can still, I'm sure over time you can do many things, but if you want that step change from 100 to 20%, then you will need to have a regional strategy, right? And that's when the government of India, other states need to come together. The second thing you asked, the second thing I must tell you, first of all, is also the fact that pollution in Delhi typically peaked at 2012, 13, 14. This government, the Aam Aadmi Party government, came to power in 2015, as we all know. And in the last 8 years, data bears this out. The good news is that there has been an approximate 30% reduction in the average annual pollution. You measure it by average AQI or the particulate matter PM 2.5. So that's a good news that, many people absolutely. There is no downplaying the importance of working on air pollution because it matters to everyone.
Yeah.
You know,
But there is progress happening. That's
one thing that needs to be underscored. And I'll come to why and what has happened really. But I think anybody who's hearing this should not just be optimistic about living in Delhi, but optimistic about the potential of public policy. That yes, you are grappling with tough problems. There are many times, as I said, pollution is a classic problem where if you do not have coordination at a pan-India level, you're not going to address it beyond a certain point. Can a chief minister of one state do something? Certainly they can. But these two ground truths I want to lay, that overall there has been some a key shift that has happened, and I don't think any other city in India, it's not come to my notice, that has seen this kind of a 1/3 pollution reduce ho gaya hai Delhi mein. Now you asked, how is the government looking at it? And I think that's where we need to start looking at the sources of pollution. Delhi's pollution broadly comprises of 4 components, I would say. First is transport. Okay, vehicular transport, vehicular pollution is roughly, and there is a summer profile of pollution, there's a winter profile of pollution. I'm talking about, if you average mota agar dekhe, to 25% of pollution, particulate matter, comes from the transport, the vehicular traffic. Another 25% comes from industry. Now this is important to know because Delhi ko people don't associate with industry. But this is going back to that 30-70. Yes, there are close to around 1,700 units of industrial units in Delhi. But there's a lot in NCR. Because once Delhi tightened its noose around polluting industries, the easiest thing they found to do is, chalo theek hai, 5 kilometer, 10 kilometer, Sarat ke bahar chale jate hain. Obviously it does, and this is where the dilemma of, the half-baked policy making ki yahi challenges hote hain, that you optimize at a very narrow level. You don't really solve the problem, but you've shifted the problem to somebody else's. So pollution, this thing is 25%. Another 25% is roughly around construction and road dust. Now this is obviously very pertinent. This is Delhi ke andar kafi hota hai, NCR mein construction bhi bahut massive construction ho raha hai, and there are many norms as to how you can control construction dust, but they are violated, and until you have a very strong regulatory oversight, you cannot fix it. Road dust is huge because the sheer volume of roads, and as whenever the vehicles ply, it suspends the dust particles. And the fourth is typically the biomass burning agriculture, or you see in winters, even people are burning small fires here and there. So ye miscellaneous sources hai. Obviously at the time of crop stubble burning, it takes up. So this is, I'm talking about the average.
Annual average, but isme us time.
Obviously stubble burning mein wo 50% cross kar jata hai. So at that time that becomes the most significant.
But at the same time, it's important to recognize that that's not the only problem. Because the general narrative can become ki stubble ke karan hi sab kuch ho raha hai. Aisa bhi nahi hai. That time, yes, it is a significant source, but overall you're saying it's 1/4 roughly of vehicular, industrial, then you have your road and construction, and then you have the miscellaneous, including the biomass
and the agriculture stubble burning and stuff. And therefore, one of the reasons why pollution has been a bane for many Indian cities today, if you look at pollution levels in Bombay, Pune, Calcutta, maybe even higher than what Delhi has. And this has been going up because there are so many sources that you need to control. Well, Delhi invested first and foremost in a very good measurement strategy. It was unfortunate that back in 2013-14, Delhi had only one air quality monitoring station. And today we have highest in the country, around 40 continuous air quality monitoring stations. You can actually monitor from various parts of Delhi and see the profile. So part of it is
classical
data.
Development sector thing, right? What gets measured gets done. The measurement.
Absolutely. What gets measured, at least there is a political will then available. I mean, you need to have the political will to act on it. But actually it's a function of it. If you don't want to see the problem, you'll not even measure it. Acha hai, bawal bhi nahi khada hoga, koi puchega bhi nahi. And that is, and the reality is, if you look at some of the international rankings of most polluted cities, you'll find Kanpur, Lucknow, some of these cities as the topmost, but वहाँ पे कभी इतना बवाल नहीं होता because hardly monitoring real time होता नहीं है. साल के end में by the time everybody is moved on. So anyways, for Delhi, we have always recognized that unfortunately environment has not become a big political issue in the country, and I say it unfortunately because if politicians care about something, you can fix it, right? And so in that sense, I think your viewers should know that it's good for issues to be politically relevant because that's when the time, energy, resources flow into it.
I fully with you on that.
So Delhi mein, obviously this is where some of the most powerful people in the country live here. The media is very active here, and as a government, we are very conscious that this is one of the biggest issues.
So what's the macro strategy? And then you've kind of...
So macro strategy...
Sources are this, you're doing the measurement now, just at a high level, and then we'll deep dive. But
see, at a high level, there are 8 to 10 different initiatives that the government has been... So initially, I'll tell you, until 2016-17, the first 2-3 years was more about the government was itself trying to understand what are the various levers that were available to us. And before we realized the winter of 2015 and 16, you may have read this, Delhi becomes a gas chamber. Those were the headlines that were passed. So definitely the government, I think, was more in a reactionary mode initially, and therefore emergency measures like odd even took birth at that point in time. A few measures did initiate at that time, but I think it was finally around 2017-18 when the government realized that no, we will have to take some short-term immediate measures, but we'll need to have a longer-term plan to change the profile of these pollution sources in Delhi. Some of the short-term measures, as I said, odd even was one. One other thing that government of Delhi did was that we shut down our thermal power plants. Okay, so one of the, as part of the industrial pollution, when I said, it's not just the industries, but your power plants, majority of power in India is non-renewable, right? We know that it's coal.
I think it's still roughly 2/3, roughly.
2/3, I think it is like that. The renewable share is increasing, but right now also it's quite substantial. But Delhi had 2 thermal power plants within the borders of Delhi. And we shut both of them down, one in 2016 and the other of 2018. Today, Delhi is one of the few states which has no thermal power plants operating within its borders. But there are still around 12 thermal power plants that operate in and around Delhi in the larger NCR region. And there is work going on in talking to those governments and at least making sure that they are not as polluting. There are technologies available to reduce the pollution profile.
So that was the other short-term thing, odd even thermal plant.
Odd even thermal power plant. But, and then, see, the most immediate thing that is available to any government is enforcement. You crack down upon, construction norms, road dust. So, Delhi started tightening all these norms. Earlier, itne well-defined nahi the. And I would say today, the kind of penalties that people pay or the rigor with which the norms and guidelines are defined is far more rigorous in Delhi than anywhere else. In 2018, February was a landmark as far as Delhi was concerned. And I think that was almost after a year of planning that Delhi government announced a green budget. The entire theme of the budget of Delhi government that year was how do we put in a long-term plan to reduce air pollution in Delhi? Because by that time we realized that ad hoc cheezein jitni bhi karni thi humne kar li. Ad hoc in the sense the temporary relief measures,
to get
low-hanging fruits. The low-hanging fruits are not ad hoc because cracking down on the temporary sources of pollution, thermal power plants, ye sare band ho gaye the. 2018 is when we came up with the green budget of Delhi.
What were the main components?
And that's what sort of, if you look at, therefore, what did the Delhi government do? And I think it's important if we go in the breakup that we said, right? So, first was vehicular transport, right? We realized that obviously Delhi has very high number of private vehicles that are registered. And therefore, to reduce the share of vehicular pollution in Delhi, you need to both reduce the adoption of private vehicles, which means you should strengthen the public transport of Delhi. And second is to make sure that the entire transport sector moves to electric.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it. But I'm just laying it out that within transport, there's a twin-pronged strategy. A, promote public transport within which the free rides to women comes, within which increasing the bus capacity of Delhi today is the highest it has ever been, around 7,400 buses. It was around 5,400 back in 2015. Increasing the Delhi metro network within Delhi by 78% in the last 8 years. Many people associate that Delhi metro to ban gayi thi Sheila Jiti ji ke time pe. Obviously, it started in her term. But in the last 8 years, the network of Delhi metro has expanded by around 80%. So that continuous investment and expansion is going on. The second is industrial pollution. Now, this is very important because yahan pe, as I said, Delhi has around 1,600 industrial units. Majority of them were using polluting fuels. It could be coal, it could be pet coke. These are actually very dirty fuels. You will see that chimneys would be, putting out carbon black smoke. And Delhi was the first state in India to have a very stringent standards defined of what fuels are permitted and not. much before NGT and others started acting upon it. And ये 2016-17 में ही this order came out, after which there was a period given to shift all for all the industries to shift from polluting fuels to piped natural gas, PNG or CNG.
Got it.
And Delhi government even incentivized industries to move to these things. So by 2021, by the way, 100% of Delhi's industries have now moved to PNG. So all the dirty fuels that were used in industries have all come to a nil.
Got it.
Another big factor I told you about power plants, but this is very interesting, that one of the sources of pollution is diesel generators, DG sets. And why does that happen? Because we do not have, as a country, we've never had 24/7 electricity in large parts of the country. Neither in industrial areas, neither in residential areas. Even in 2014-15, since I think you live in Delhi you've been living for a long time, these red color Yamaha sets were very known. You go to Lajpat Nagar market, you go to any market, all shops will have this phat awaaz aata tha. So in 2015 also, power cuts in Delhi summers were a known feature, which means everybody would have an inverter or a DG sets. Over the last 8 years, one thing that Delhi has achieved, it took not more than 3 to 4 years, is really strengthen the distribution system. And today, I think Delhi is not, I don't think, this is data to prove that Delhi has today 24/7 electricity in terms of, and this is best than any other state in the country, which means, and we get these figures from the market, that the sales of inverters and DG sets have almost reduced to a zero, which means there's no pollution due to diesel. Now, the moment you step, that's been a very big feature which doesn't get acknowledged in all these, that, DG sets generate, because diesel generates a lot of pollution.
So on the first bucket, we were saying essentially shift people to public transport, getting the EV kind of policy, and we'll talk about that. Then the second, you were saying, 1600 जो भी industry थी, उनको you kind of gave a timeline, you gave a guideline that you shift to CNG, and then kind of 24/7 power, ensuring that there's no kind of diesel through generators. That's the second one. Third वाले में
vehicle pollution, I'll say one more thing. That one big intervention, this is where I'll credit the central government, because central government has this project of peripheral expressway. There's an eastern, so earlier what used to happen is that all the commercial traffic and trucks and lorries, and I think when we talk about vehicular pollution, we'll talk about also it's important to understand the breakup of even within vehicular pollution. But trucks account for around 30% of all vehicular pollution in Delhi.
So both the expressways, the peripheral expressways, that make sure that they don't come
don't come to Delhi. Because earlier ये लोग दिल्ली में आते थे, even if a truck is going from Bombay to Haryana or Punjab, then it would pass through Delhi. And now this peripheral expressway completely skip Delhi and you pass around it. So both of them were opened around 2018 and 2020 or something, though expressways, and that has definitely help in drastically reducing pollution. So these are broadly.
And तीसरा bucket जो अपना था construction and
construction and road dust. As I said, that the beginning and the tightening of norms had begun then itself. On the road dust part, there are two things that the government is doing in a very, very big way. One is to increase the green cover of Delhi, and that is data to sort of, if you have more afforestation, if you have a more denser vegetation, then the suspended dust doesn't remain for as long. So Delhi government is investing every year into massive tree plantation exercises. This year, for example, our target is planting around 50 lakh saplings in Delhi. We have tightened norms for cutting of trees. Today, Delhi has the most, I would say, rigorous tree transplantation policy. आज दिल्ली में आप पेड़ काट नहीं सकते हो.
हटाना तो और कहीं लगाना है.
हाँ, आपको एक तो लगाना होगा, ट्रांसप्लांट करना होगा as per a scientific process. Second, आपको ट्रांसप्लांट करने के बाद भी क्योंकि उस पेड़ को काटा है आपने एक हिसाब से, यू आर ट्रांसप्लांटिंग इट फाइन, यू विल हैव टू प्लांट 10 trees as compensation to touching one. No state again has this kind of a rigorous. So लोग तो रोते हैं obviously, but it is important, and we've even strengthened these. जैसे ट्रांसप्लांटेशन पहले मैंडेटरी नहीं था, पहले ये था कि एक की जगह पे आपको 5 लगाने हैं, हमने एक की जगह पे 10 कर दिया और ट्रांसप्लांटेशन भी कर दिया. So there have been these series of measures. It's not been just, as I said,
it's not a magic wand, right? That's the other thing to here understand, कि ऐसा कुछ जादू नहीं है कि वो एक साल में you can kind of really control pollution. It's as you were saying, these 5, 6, 7 different things that are happening in parallel and hopefully should kind of get the results.
So and that is why I see that over the 5, 7 years, I said there has been a reduction. But before we move on from pollution, I must say that one thing which we really lack today at this stage, and I think as a country we need to understand the issue, and therefore our response needs to be, होता क्या है कि जब भी winter आता है, obviously around Diwali and around the stubble burning, every focus is only on stubble burning and this thing. our average levels of pollution in India across the year are pretty pathetic. Let's accept it that out of the 30 most polluted cities in the world, 21 are India. Delhi इकलौती नहीं है. Delhi is number 8 in that. There are 5-7 more Indian cities at the top of this list. And as I said, if Delhi's are in our domain, what is there is only that 30% sources of pollution. What about the rest? Yeah. And that is why for the longest time we've been saying that there must be an empowered team of the Prime Minister and the Chief Ministers of the state. First, we should accept the fact that air pollution is a national threat. Is this worthwhile the time of all the Chief Ministers and Prime Minister? Definitely yes. I think we will not disagree, but I don't think this reality has struck yet, because we've never seen that kind of a coordination at the central government level to say that nahi, ye regional issue hai. And therefore, the onus is not always on Delhi. As I said, if Delhi cracks down on its industries, they'll move out. Similarly, if we are providing 24/7 electricity, you just go 10 or 30 kilometers in Haryana, there are 6 to 8 hour power cuts. Even today in this summer in Haryana, 6 to 8 hour power cuts. You will be surprised how many dozens of societies in Gurgaon and Noida, fancy societies, are operating on DG sets.
Yeah, they put their own DG sets and yeah.
So, ये कहाँ की चतुराई है कि आप दिल्ली के नाम पे, obviously everybody wants pollution, but even people of Gurgaon and Noida deserve good air, and therefore there has to be almost like a common minimum program. That is something that there has to be a mandatory regional action plan for air pollution.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because cities like Shanghai, Beijing and Mexico City, these are two prime examples of large mega cities that have managed to really reduce their pollution. And all has happened because of a regional action plan, which Delhi doesn't.
And all of these problems which don't look at state borders, right? There are many such problems. Pollution is one of them.
Pollution is a classic example.
Country, I think that's one space that we've not done well in, right? Which is coordinated effort across states to solve for something which doesn't look at boundaries. So that's a challenge. Coming to specifically, I want to talk about the vehicular pollution part of it. And within that also the EV policy that you brought in. And I think that's one of the most forward-looking, the first state, second state to bring an EV policy. And if you can share a little bit about what was the context. Of course, there's this whole pollution wala bit there. And what did you do? Because at that time, it didn't exist in other states, I'm assuming. So what is the background work that you did to kind of put that policy together? We'll get into the specifics of the policy also, but a little bit of the context there.
First, let me state that one of the most satisfying experiences I've had as being part of Delhi government the last many years, 6 years now, I think more than 6 years, has been the Delhi EV policy. I've been associated very closely from day one of, thinking, conceiving, designing, working with all the stakeholders, and through the implementation phase. We have just finished 3 years of Delhi's EV policy. Now, you said, how did you start? The motivation was very clear. The motivation was air pollution. And I think that separates Delhi EV policy from many other state EV policies, because if you look at it, you look at the government of India, which is a ministry that is implementing the EV policy of government of India.
The transportation and the
heavy industry. Is the FAME scheme of government of India that subsidizes EVs is implemented by the Department of Heavy Industries. So motivation है कि नहीं manufacturing को बढ़ावा देना है. Ours was probably the second or third EV policy. I think Karnataka and maybe Telangana had an EV policy earlier before us. But there also the theme was the same, that we are bringing an EV policy to support manufacturers to produce domestic EV vehicles.
Here the motivation was pollution.
Air pollution. And therefore, one big change in our EV policy, which was very clear because our motivation was clear. The reason why Delhi said that, no, let's come up with I would almost say a path-breaking EV policy, is because we definitely want to make a dent on pollution. For us, pollution is one of our major mandates, as we see that we want to be able to change the levels of pollution in Delhi. And we realize that vehicular pollution, as we discussed, is roughly 25% around the year. In winters, it even increases. You cannot do that until you shift, the entire vehicular fleet to electric. And therefore, the policy needs to be focusing on the demand side. What can we do to make every section of the society to adopt EVs?
Want to use
rather than attracting big manufacturers ki banao. And we also realized, after almost a year, and there was, by the way, a year of consultative exercise, making a draft policy, doing a national consultation, which had stakeholders from all, there were think tanks, there were manufacturers, There were international bodies like the United Nations Environment Program. A lot of people participated in our consultations. And we realized that, a big problem in India's EV industry was that सब कोई मैन्युफैक्चरर को पुश देना चाह रहे हैं, लेकिन जब तक डिमांड ही नहीं है मार्केट में तो मैन्युफैक्चरर किसके लिए बनाएगा? You're asking them to improve range, provide better EVs, but research money is going to come only when there's consumer demand.
Yeah.
So Delhi at that time, I think the big reason Delhi's policy stood out was that we were almost entirely, we didn't even have a section for manufacturers. We said that we are dedicated, we were the first EV policy to stick our neck out and say that our success will be in terms of adoption of EVs in the country. And we said that by 2024, so we brought out our policy in August 2020. Today we are in August 2023. So exactly 3 years we finished. But we had laid out a 4-year target that time that by end of 2024, 1 out of every 4 vehicles being sold in Delhi will be EV.
That's an ambitious goal.
25%
of new
all new vehicles. All new vehicles. You can't do obviously jo purane vehicles, and they always phase out at the end of the day. 10-12 saal ki jo age hoti hai unki. But the reason why it was bold, and again credit at some level to the leadership that they signed off on it, is because at that time the take-up of electric vehicles in Delhi was 1 to 2%. So 100 में से एक वाहन आपका electric बिक रहा है, and you are saying कि मैं 25 पे ले जाऊंगा, unheard of,
So you're saying two differences. One, you're saying the focus being pollution, and within the policy, the emphasis on demand generation as opposed to manufacturing. And there, the ambitious goal of saying कि 2024 तक हमें 25% new ये चाहिए. Was there any other such top line kind of goal that you set, or this is the
number one and the last goal? Everything else is dedicated. देखो एक बार clarity होती है policy. I mean that's the one thing which maybe we'll talk about for other policies. That part of the problem in our policy landscape is you do not know what you're solving for. आपको ये भी करना है, आपको वो भी करना है, आपको ये भी करना है. That is not how policies. You determine your focus, and then everything needs to be pulling
in service to that goal, basically.
Yeah, it has to be in service of that goal. So once and that doesn't happen easily. The point is, it takes time to build that consensus and make people agree कि नहीं ये हमें we have to set a north star.
Yeah.
And एक बार वो set कर लिया, now tell us what needs to be done at every stage to reach there. So that's how we approach.
Before that, tell me कि इस पे चल क्या रहा है? What is the current statistics and how does it also fare vis-a-vis other cities in the country? But in Delhi का where are we?
In 3 years of the EV policy of Delhi, I'm very happy to state that we have reached exactly halfway. We are at around 12 to 13% of all sales of vehicles that are happening in Delhi currently are electric vehicles.
Got it.
The national average is around 6 to 7%.
Okay.
And I think the topmost city even after Delhi would be maybe Bangalore or Pune, which is at around 8%. So we are at least 1.5 times ahead of
other cities,
the nearest other cities. But these numbers hide a lot. I'll tell you.
No, we'll get into that. But you feel कि next year का target is in sight?
I think it's still going to be a little steep. I sincerely hope that we have around 1.5 years left. We will probably touch 20.
Okay.
And I'll accept it any day. If you ask me, I'm going to accept it any day because Delhi did something which no other city and state was willing to do.
Yeah.
And we have, if you just allow me to share 2 numbers.
Please.
Because this is, sometimes this top line numbers hide the reality of the massiveness of the change. Today, any person who is visiting Delhi, अगर आप दिल्ली की सड़कों पे घूम रहे हो, I'll take a bet. You spend 5 minutes on any road and you tell me if you'll not see a green plate. You will definitely see a green plate.
Yes.
Green plate is an electric vehicle, right? And the numbers speak for themselves. As I said, that in the year, in 2020 में हमारी policy आई थी. 2019 में, I pulled this data out for you. 2019 में total electric two-wheelers दिल्ली में कितने बिके थे? 1000, करीबन 1100 या something. 2022 में within 3 years कितने बिके? 35,000, 35x growth in two-wheelers in 3 years.
And this is something interesting, Jasmine, because I know, and also being in Delhi, there's a lot of focus in the policy has been on two-wheelers and three-wheelers, right? So if you quickly explain the reasons for it. There are multiple, sure. I think there's social factor, there's also kind of economic viability, many things, but you can just, why did you decide कि focus करते हैं four-wheeler को बाद में देखेंगे?
Yeah, see 2 primary factors. As I said that our motivation was pollution. And second, we set a numbers target that 25% of this thing. Now, it's very interesting that normally the moment you talk about electric vehicles in the West, it's all cars. वहाँ पे two wheelers, three wheelers की ज़्यादा बातें नहीं होती. Everything is adopted, everyone has moved to cars. In the case of Delhi, when you look at the pollution profile of Delhi, close to 50% of the entire vehicular pollution of Delhi is 2 and 3 wheelers.
Achha.
And this is very important to know. And once you understand what is the total vehicular stock in Delhi, it's not surprising. Out of the total, there are more than 1 crore vehicles plying on Delhi. They're registered in Delhi. 67 to 70% of them are 2 and 3 wheelers.
So 2/3 of the number-wise, 2/3 are kind of 2 wheelers and 3 wheelers, and half of the
pollution is
coming from.
Yes, around 45 to 50% is 2 wheelers and 3 wheelers. Another 30% is trucks, for which we have peripheral expressways, and there are other strategies. It's the only remaining 20% which is cars, buses, all other kinds of vehicles and stuff. And this is very important to understand, because if you have to, obviously, therefore, the disproportionate impact or the focus needs to be on 2 wheelers. So it was out of our own self-interest that हमें pollution कम करना था. Now it incidentally happened so that there is, for any technology, you cannot push it against market forces. Let's be real. Subsidies are effective on the margin. When you know that there is a basic sense for economic viability, and maybe 4-5 साल अगर wait करो तो economic viability हो जाएगी. But you can advance that shift by targeting your subsidy. It happens so that for 2 wheelers and 3 wheelers, the economic viability of EVs was far better than for 4 wheelers. Okay, because 4 wheelers you need larger batteries. People expect that maybe 4 wheeler I should be able to take interstate, and therefore it should run 300-400 kilometers. 2 wheelers में लोग खुश हैं, 100 kilometer की range मिल जाती है, which means you have a smaller battery, smaller.
What is the economics of 2-wheeler, EV 2-wheeler, if you could quickly...
No, so...
if you buy a normal one versus the EV, and then the ongoing running cost.
See, first of all, today, after the shift towards BS6 petrol and diesel standards, so 2-wheelers is largely petrol, the capital cost of an electric 2-wheeler and a petrol 2-wheeler is more or less the same.
And this is without subsidy, or with the subsidy?
This is with the subsidy.
With the subsidy?
With the subsidy, whatever the current existing subsidies, maybe a little higher in other states, but in Delhi, it's become the same. Okay, so capital, there's nothing to change. But if you look at the running cost is where and I think that is why I usually tell my friends that you'll be foolish today if you're buying a petrol 2-wheeler. It's only your ability not to understand what's happening. Because आप देख लीजिए एक petrol 2-wheeler, let's just talk numbers, right? 100 रुपये लीटर का पेट्रोल बिक रहा है, ठीक है. A good 2-wheeler पेट्रोल कितना देगी, as they say in ads, 50 किलोमीटर देगी, let's say. So you're spending how much? 2 rupees you're spending for 1 kilometer of running cost. हम maintenance जोड़ भी नहीं रहे हैं, बस इतना मोटा करते हैं. Now, as far as an electric 2-wheeler is concerned, normally it's a 3 kilowatt battery, and that will give you around, let's say, 60 kilometers. So 20 kilometers per kilowatt आपको मिल रहा है. 1 unit का क्या power है? Delhi, by the way, has the cheapest EV tariff in the country at around, let's say, 5 rupees. तो 5 रुपये में आप 20 किलोमीटर जा पा रहे हो, मतलब 25 पैसा प्रति किलोमीटर. So roughly we're talking 10x, 8 times, 8 to 10 times. It's a simple math. I don't need to...
Essentially, you're saying it's a no-brainer today to kind of get an EV 2-wheeler in Delhi versus a petrol wala. This thing, there's absolutely no reason for why somebody would do that. And that you have kind of... some of it, technology has kind of moved forward. You provide the subsidy so that upfront investment is the same, and then ongoing to a heavy difference. That is a very... And you're saying volume there was bigger, the contribution to pollution was bigger, and therefore you said कि इस पे focus करते हैं, and it's kind of...
Right. And at the margin, because what happens is, the moment the Indian market is very price sensitive. So even if there's a 10,000 rupees gap, अगर मुझे 60,000 में petrol 2-wheeler मिल रहा है, why will I take a 80,000-85,000? You will not think about कि नहीं मेरे 4 साल की running cost हो गया.
And that's where policy comes in to kind of see कि ठीक है, थोड़ा सा gap है, इसको पूरा कर देते हैं.
Exactly. So it's a nudge that you need to give. So we said कि नहीं हम 70 से भी कम ले जाने की कोशिश करेंगे. तो 65 to 70 में आज अच्छा सा पेट्रोल इलेक्ट्रिक 2-wheeler मिल जाएगा, 70 के में आपको पेट्रोल मिल रहा है. So
it's a win-win. मतलब there's no reason left for consumer.
Absolutely, and that is the reason we have moved from 1,000 to 35,000. The other number that I wanted to give you that even for cars, okay, there were 500 electric cars that were sold in Delhi in the year 2019. In 2022, it is 5,500, almost 11 to 12.
Cars में when this economics add up, I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, कि capital cost अभी भी ज़्यादा है गाड़ी का अगर आप electric लेते हैं, But if you run the car a lot, it depends on
Precisely.
usage कितना है. अगर आपको usage बहुत है, then you may make up for this upfront investment through the savings through petrol wala versus electric, right?
That's precisely the point. And I'll give you one more statistic. I mean, at the end of the day, the reality is all there in the numbers, you know. 50% as far as private cars is concerned, maybe in the last year of all the private cars sold, 5% would have been electric cars. But when you talk about cabs, commercial car fleets, 50% of all cars sold in Delhi, cabs, have been electric. And it's a staggering number. No other city in India is seeing this. 1 out of every 2 is electric. And the reason is exactly that. Commercial गाड़ी 200 किलोमीटर daily minimum चलती है 200-250 किलोमीटर, and you see the savings when you run for 200. So I think somewhere, interestingly remarked that if you're
फर्क रहता है, upfront it will be what, 1.5x, 1.5
roughly 1.5 times.
roughly 1.5, and there you kind of, if you're running for 200,
And I tell you, the challenge is also because the market has not matured. Unlike, as I said, two-wheelers, there is a lot of numbers, the price parity is there. You see a lot more models, a lot more manufacturers in the play. यहाँ पे electric में you still at the cheaper end now, a few manufacturers like Tata and I think MG has a cheaper car, but the cheaper car market hasn't taken off.
Got it.
The SUV market has really taken off, and you will see a lot of those applying.
When you see this, in how many years do you see a trend that you're seeing in two-wheelers to actually at the same pace happen on the four-wheeler front also?
I think given also where we are as an Indian society economically, I think unless we are able to break through the sub 10 lakh and even have some models around 5 to 6 lakh cars, because right now there is no comparison. You can start a good EV, even a basic EV will be 8 lakh to 10 lakhs. And you're talking only above. My sense is maybe another 3 to 5 years at least. And it's also dependent upon how the global battery prices trend and stuff. But I think two-wheelers and three-wheelers, Delhi has shown it that the time has not arrived. The time arrived 3 years back. We jumped on it, and Delhi is today shown that this is already happening in Delhi, and it can happen anywhere else in India.
I think another thing that you've done is because of the math that you're talking about for four-wheelers and larger vehicles, DTC buses, right?
Yeah.
The buses, because they travel the
200 kilometers plus.
200 kilometers plus. So there you've kind of completely shifting slowly the fleet towards.
Yes, and I think that is where there are two reasons. One is it's economically feasible because most public buses run more than 200 kilometers, and therefore it was an easy decision. The complexity is more about transitioning a huge fleet like that. And
share some numbers.
So Delhi had around 5,500 buses back in 2015.
These were all CNG.
These are all CNG
buses.
These are all CNG buses, and there were already some contracts and tenders underway. So finally, today we have around 7,400 buses, out of which 400 are electric, 7,000 are CNG.
Achha.
However, Delhi is the first city and state, and I'll use this many times because I think in environment we really have become a trendsetter in many of these respects. We are the first city or state to commit that all our future purchases are going to be electric. Now, the good, and this is where, good fortune meets good intentions. Buses have an average life of 12 to 15 years. Most of the buses in Delhi, the CNG buses, were bought around Commonwealth Games, which is 2010. So, अब ये सारी retire हो रही हैं.
Got it.
So, our policy decision came at a time when almost the entire fleet was retiring. And if we hadn't made a decision now, we would be stuck with a polluting fleet for the next 15 years.
Yeah.
So we have made a decision.
So you're ordering, आजकल ordering चल रहा है, and then you kind of...
No, everything. It's more than 2,500 buses are already ordered. They are at different stages of delivery. Another 2,500 are at advanced stage of tendering. बाकी और अगले साल होगा. Roughly where we are going to be end of 2025. 1.5 years from now, Delhi will have around 10,000 buses, out of which 8,000 are going to be pure electric. Outside of China, Delhi will be having the largest electric fleet anywhere in the world.
This is fascinating. This is very, very interesting. I think some of these things don't get talked about, but this is...
I think that's why we need people like you to talk sense, otherwise most of the media is really...
This is fascinating. I think you're saying 8,000 of the 10,000 buses by just, it's down the corner. 2.5 years. One and a half.
And it's not come easy. As I said, the shift, because you have to electrify all your depots. See, at the end of the day, your electricity grid has to be ready to, power 10,000, 8,000 buses. So we have made an investment of 1,500 crores to electrify our 70 or so bus depots. We worked with our power discoms. All that work has happened.
Fast chargers there. You have all of those kind of.
Yeah, you have to strengthen the grid. You have to make sure the grid doesn't fail. So it's almost making your entire city future ready.
This is very, very interesting, Jasmine. It's I can continue to talk about this position, but let's kind of with this on this kind of happy note, I would say, let's move to the other thing, which is women's safety. I think there again, if you could lay out, that's been a perennial thing for a very, very long time, and all of us when we were studying, what's the 3-4 main or the macro strategy there and the initiatives that the Delhi government is taking and you've been a part of?
No, so first let me state that, one of the things that is really heart-wrenching for me to see even somebody within the government in Delhi is the fact that on the larger scale, Delhi, the larger reality is that Delhi does continue to remain a little, an unsafe city for women. And again, I don't need to sugarcoat anything because the numbers say it all. And, if you look at just 2012 to 2022, over the 10-year span, and we take just one number, there's a larger categorization of crimes against women, but if you just look at the number of rape incidents in Delhi, they've doubled in the last 10 years. Okay, so yes, I'll save some of the things that we are doing, but there is a larger problem at stake. And when it comes to crimes against women, there is an infrastructure response that you can give to the problem, and then there's a law and order. At the end of the day, obviously, it's crimes against women, right? And women's safety, or, whenever that comes to safety and security, there's a huge law and order. And I think one of the things that your viewers or your listeners will need, or some of them may already know, that Delhi has multiple power centers. So one thing that does not come under the domain of Delhi government, the elected chief minister, is law and order. Delhi police reports to the central government.
Yeah. I'm interrupting you, Jasmine. You talked about infrastructure and law and order.
Yeah.
But is there a social kind of part to it also, which requires, of course, society is what it is, but there's a role that the government has to play there as well?
No, it is. But I would say that Delhi, in that sense, is a microcosm of India, right? Delhi should not be, 38% of all crimes against women reported in India, in all the metropolitan cities, top 20 metropolitan cities are in Delhi alone.
Yeah.
It's a pretty shocking statistic if you ask me. Delhi, if you look at it, Delhi, it's not that people from Delhi come from Mars. बाकी सारे लोग देश भर में कहाँ से? नहीं तो दिल्ली, देश से ही तो दिल्ली बना है.
बिल्कुल.
तो see, probably yes, because Delhi is a huge economic magnet. There are migrants from all over the country, but I don't think that's true for every other city, every mega city. There are problems which Delhi needs to solve for. I can tell you some of the interventions, because on the infrastructure side, because the biggest lever as an elected government which does not have law and order machinery in its hand, and we can come to solutions a little later on, even on that front. But as far as the infra issues are concerned, we realize that, there's still a few things that we can, and we needed to be very clear that as a responsible government, we are doing everything that we possibly can. First and foremost, we made sure that we invest in CCTV cameras. Just this idea that you are under surveillance, you cannot do anything and expect that you will not be caught, should not be there. And Delhi government has invested massively in CCTVs on public streets. Over the last, we started with a major initiative around 2017-18. As on date, there are 2.75 lakh CCTV cameras on Delhi's public streets. Another, I think, 1.25 lakh cameras are going to be installed. So total plan for around 4 lakh cameras. But even with the number of CCTV cameras in streets today, Delhi today has the highest, and Forbes did a ranking of CCTV cameras on streets across the world. Delhi is today number 1 in terms of the surveillance infrastructure that the government has installed. We are at 1800 cameras per square mile. After that, London comes at 1100. The next Indian city is Chennai at 600 cameras per square mile. So that's number 1. Second, we realize is that, what are the other reasons for feeling unsafe? And dark spots is another big issue that, with the way that Delhi is expanding and, residential townships forming in every part of the corner of the city. So we worked together with this organization, Safety Pin, right? And they do surveys on dark spots. And I think there was a count of around 7,800 dark spots in Delhi back in 2016. And Delhi government...
How do you define a dark spot, just technically?
No, so dark spot is where there is no public street light infrastructure in a certain span of an area. I think 50 or 100 meters. That's how they define it. And I mean in regular layman language, it's obviously when you're walking in a street with no street light, you feel unsafe, right? So no passageway which is public, and people have to travel, should there be a dark spot. That is the idea. So over the last, again, 5-6 years, more than 2.1 lakh street lights have been installed in Delhi. The latest figure of dark spots is around 1,400. Government has just announced the final stage of the streetlights initiative. Around 70,000 streetlights are going to be installed in this year itself. So we are moving towards becoming a zero dark spots city. The third intervention that Delhi has made is in terms of public buses. Now we have to, and many people who live in Delhi realize, if you were a girl, if you have to travel on DTC bus, you always think twice, because there are incidents that everybody has memories, and I've had, family members who talk about those days. So we realize that, at least these are the spaces we can control. We may not have law and order machinery outside. So
marshals.
Yes, absolutely, marshals. So and Delhi is the, ये इकलौती सरकार है जिसने ये इन्वेस्टमेंट डिसीजन लिया है कि हर बस में, हर शिफ्ट में एक बस मार्शल रहेगा, only from the point of view of women's safety. Because if, let's say, there is an incident, you are feeling unsafe, who will you ask? You will ask your fellow passengers, but people don't want to, right? But obviously, if there is a वर्दी में कोई बस मार्शल वहाँ पे बैठा है या खड़ा है, you will go and at least seek help. And that's been, we've done surveys, we've asked anecdotally also, that women, the sense of safety and security increased a lot after 13,000 bus marshals have been deployed. Today, our entire bus fleet of 7,400 buses has CCTVs inside the buses. All of them with live feed going to a central command center. So, ये infrastructure investments हुए हैं.
But the other bus marshals are private buses में also you put?
No. These are all bus.
No, I'm saying 7,000.
Yeah, because in two shifts.
Two shifts.
Two shifts. So, close to 13,000, 14,000 bus marshals would be there. But one thing I'm going to talk about over here is the free bus rides for women. And there's a larger angle of women empowerment over there, that why we felt that, really for women to access job opportunities or education opportunities, safe public transport, but also free public transport is a huge enabler. But there is this, amongst people who work in and experts who work on women's safety, they say there is safety in numbers. The more the women travel, the more you are in public spaces, there is lesser, I would say, courage that others would have to do wrong, right? Yeah. And it's very interesting that after Delhi introduced free bus travel, from around the ridership of women in our buses used to be around 25%. Today it is 35%. And what does it mean? It means that earlier around 10 lakh women were, total ridership of Delhi DTC and cluster buses is around 40 lakh per day. तो 10 लाख महिलाएं पहले ट्रैवल करती थी, आज ये 14 लाख महिलाएं. 4 lakh women are traveling more in Delhi's buses because of the free bus. And the reason is this, because see, at the end of the day, as a government, and this is where being accountable, being a popularly elected government, you always have your ears to the ground. And therefore, if there is any new idea that we get, these are matters where there is immense political will. अगर कहीं पे भी किसी को लगता है कि नहीं ये यहाँ पे अच्छा हो रहा है, we'll be very happy to adopt it. But levers, there are certain levers that we are not able to figure how do we improve on it. And I'll give you this because I gave you a depressing statistic at the beginning that rapes in Delhi have doubled over the last 10 years. If you look at the overall classification of crimes against women, they are increasing 15% year on year. That's been the trend for the last 2 years.
This is national or this?
No, Delhi. मैं केवल दिल्ली की बात कर रहा हूँ. And within that, if you look at, so crimes against women are increasing 15% year on year. Guess the conviction rate of the crimes against women. It's less than 5%. Less than 5%. These are crimes. This is data of 2019. Then 2020, it was 4%. So somewhere you figure that, at the end of the day, this larger question, and because I think Delhi also is going through this phase where this question of should there be a popular and a elected government in Delhi, I think these are the ramifications that you have, that Delhi police doesn't have a sense of accountability towards the public of Delhi. It's accountable towards the central government. Even earlier, back in 2013 and 14, we used to have something called Thana level committees, which would be a forum where the local elected representative, the SHO of the Thana, the RWAs would all come, and there would be a dialogue and there'd be some interventions based on that. All of that has really dissolved. And I think somewhere I feel that a link Delhi police or any institution in a democracy, if there is no popular pressure, if there is no accountability, that is why you see instances like, incidents doubling over 10 years, conviction rates. These are pathetic. Any police force in the world, it's a shameful figure. And I think somewhere we really need to sort of ask the right questions also when we talk about this.
No, I agree. So it's as you're saying, infrastructure, this law and order, and I continue to believe that there's something more sensitization on the social front also it's needed. We have to also see where are we heading as a society if these are the statistics and these are the numbers. Okay, so Jasmine, so we've talked about air pollution, we've talked about women's safety, but I know that you're involved in a lot of other domains as the DDC. So if I were to just ask you that over the last 6 years, 7 years that you've been there, what are some of the top 5 things that you believe other than these two? You talked about EV policy being your kind of favorite, but other than these two, what are the other, let's say, top 5 things that have been impactful to the work that you've done?
Okay. So let me, first of all, I'll not say top 5 because, everything seems like a baby. So I'll talk about 5 which maybe pop immediately in my mind and which I'm sure, I feel they've been impactful. I think somewhere in the middle of last year, we released a report, 7 years of DDC and 70 policy innovations that DDC has brought about in Delhi government. So as you rightly said, DDC as an institution works across multiple sectors. I have a fantastic team and we try and sort of, do as much of impactful work as we can. Now coming to the other works of DDC, one example is outcome budgeting, and this is completely different from what we have spoken about. So, many times we talk about specific policies, but we don't talk about improving the machinery of governance. So somewhere at the end of the day, governments have been functioning in a manner that accountability is diluted across the chain. For me, it was a little interesting because I came earlier from a corporate world and then entered this space where I suddenly saw that there are no KRAs. No secretary, no deputy director, nobody has any KRAs. Sab, कि हाँ, broadly हमें चीजें ठीक करनी है, but otherwise, you ask them that I'm giving you 1,000 crore budget and tell me how many, let's say, with smaller clinics. Smaller clinics is a big intervention of Delhi government. So एक तो ये है कि आप कितने clinics बनाओगे साल के end में अगर मैं आपको 1,000 crore देता हूँ, but tell me how many people will you serve? So people will start scratching their head. How can we even put? And we say this is public money. If you're not serving people, तो आप क्या खोल के क्या करोगे? What is the point? So we really push the thinking in that direction.
So you defined KPIs for.
We defined. So Delhi pioneered a very comprehensive outcome budgeting exercise. It is a monitoring tool at the end of the day, and for every government scheme which has a budget allocation, we define output indicators, which is example is कितने मोहल्ला क्लिनिक बनेंगे, and outcome indicators की लोगों को क्या फायदा मिलेगा, कितने tests होंगे, कितने patient visits होंगे, वगैरह वगैरह. And over the last 5 years, this exercise has continued. Today, Delhi has around 1,800 indicators as part of its outcome budget, and 80% of government's budgetary outlay is systematically tracked every month, every quarter.
Got it.
So that's one.
I'm tempted to ask questions, but I'd hold back and move to the next one.
That's one. Second is, we do a lot of awareness kind of initiatives as well. On the, today, we're right now going through the monsoon period, and dengue, the risk of dengue is always there in tropical places like India and Delhi especially. So in dengue, Delhi used to have a lot of huge incidences of cases as well as deaths. Yeah. I remember 2015 monsoon May, there were around 60 deaths that Delhi saw, and I think maybe 5,000, 6,000 cases. In 2019, DDC worked together with the health department, and we came up with a massive awareness campaign. And we gave it a catchword as well. We worked with our entire communications team, and I'm going to say, because how do you make people involved in a dengue campaign? It's very easy. You have to make sure that, water does not stagnate and कोई इकट्ठा नहीं हो कहीं पे. तो इसको नाम दिया 10 हफ्ते, 10 बजे, 10 minute. So for 10 weeks, take 10 minutes out every Sunday morning and make sure your surroundings are clean. And CM and celebrities and all the MLAs and everybody systematically did it. So that was a massive exercise. We got school kids involved, we got RWAs involved. And I think it was the year 2021 when we saw 0 deaths of dengue. It fluctuates a little bit, every year on year, but that was a big change over the last 2-3 years.
Well, that's been a popular campaign, a successful one, I would say. And the government is also good at it. I think not every government is able to also do good communication of this kind, I think the Delhi government does a good job of it.
Yeah.
And that's great.
Yeah. One more thing I'll talk about is, and it's a very impactful, I would say one of the schemes of Delhi government is doorstep delivery of services. And this is again, it is just fundamental re-engineering the processes within government. So earlier क्या होता था कि, I mean, as a government, people associate the Aam Aadmi Party government with being anti-corruption, and we sincerely wanted to reduce the bulk of the people experience retail corruption, right? आप किसी सरकारी दफ्तर जाते हो तो for any service आपको पहले बोला जाएगा कि ये खराब है, which means you know that पैसे खिलाने. So what we said is that लोग क्यों आते हैं सरकारी दफ्तर पे? We should send the government at the doorstep of the people. So doorstep delivery is a 4-digit call number, helpline number. You call. More than 150 services today in Delhi you will get at your doorstep. Somebody will come, we call it a mobile sahayak with a tablet. They will take scans, they'll take all your photos, and let's say if you want a certain certificate or a driving license renewal, तो वो आपके घर पे आ जाएगा by courier. So that's been, lakhs of services have happened. We work together with the department to lay out the entire backend of this entire system. The last thing I'll say is at the time of COVID, and I think this was the most challenging period I have seen personally in my life for anybody who's worked within government. But at that time, there were multiple areas that DDC worked on. One of the things was reducing the turnaround time for ambulances. It's very interesting. See, the entire healthcare infrastructure came under a tremendous strain. And we realized that our ambulances are taking 50-55 minutes between every 2 patients, which means that obviously there are a lot of people who are waiting, the queue builds up. So we worked, what we do, DDC, many times it might seem that, aapke paas sare solutions hai. So that's not what DDC does. DDC actually, when we get a problem statement, we try find out who is the best expert on this in the society and pull them up, make a team and actually make sure that the problem gets solved. So we did that. In this case, we worked with an organization called Save Life Foundation. They do exemplary work on emergency care. And we did a complete, we revamped the entire system, the backend, and the turnaround time of ambulances in Delhi dropped within 3 months from 50 minutes to 18 to 19 minutes. So that's one thing that we did. At that time, during COVID, a lot of people wanted to provide support. All our, oxygen, we know there was a huge issue about medical oxygen availability. So, लोग concentrators देना चाहते थे, cylinders देना चाहते थे, philanthropies, international institutions. So DDC was at the mix, at the
nodal kind of
fulcrum.
entity
We were taking these requests, we are coordinating with
the government
the
department.
entire government system and stuff. So I can go on and on.
We had a small experience also at the time during COVID with you. With you, I'm saying the dashboard or the war room, COVID war room that was put together. So we know the way DDC was.
But I strongly, I would say that whoever is interested in learning more about all the 70 different projects DDC, the main 70 projects that we've done over the last 7 years, go to our website ddc.delhi.gov.in and you will see under publications our 7 years of DDC report.
Great, Jasmine. So, ye sara, the work that you've been doing over the last 7 odd years, I'm going to talk about the learnings. See, it's not easy to get things done in a government. It's a system. It's a mesh. You're a cabinet rank in the government, I think, and I'm assuming that's also because so that you have the weight in the system to be able to kind of move around things. Weight is not enough, but it's also required because otherwise the bureaucracy sometimes can also tend to come in the way. And specifically, things are more difficult in Delhi because of the distribution of power, and you don't have the full system under control. There are all these challenges that we kind of keep reading about in the newspapers or in the media. But what's been your learnings? How do you get things done in the government? What's the 3-4 takeaways that you have from all of this experience so far? कि ये चीजें हो तो हो जाती हैं. Of course, intent is the starting point, the will and the intent. I'm assuming with that.
No, absolutely. I understand what your question is, and I think इस पे किताबें लिखी जा सकती है. I like to think of it as there's a science of policy making and then there's a craft of policy making. Okay, science आपको public policy school में कई अच्छे non-profit institutions में आप ठीक है आप समझ जाते हो कि education policies, health policy, it's not easy but it's doable. The craft of policy making is when you get inside the government and you really start understanding how do you have to really work your way within the system. At some level, I would say a formal hierarchy helps. And as you said, I do hold a minister rank position in the government. But at the end of the day, we know that one has to carry the system along, right? At many times you realize that people have their own genuine constraints, or they may have differing priorities. Number one lesson, I would say, is that the and I'm not saying that this is the only way that policies get done. I'm sure you know, in your own Sushasan, you have spoken to many other people. I'm talking about a non-bureaucrat trying to make change happen from within the government. And I think the single largest ingredient for that change is to ensure that what you want aligns well with the political will, right? अगर आप lone warrior बन के वहाँ पे करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, that is a problem many times with even non-profits outside. You are almost hitting a wall every time because you feel like आपके जो ideas हैं, आपके ideas बहुत अच्छे हैं, आपके ideas को देश की ज़रूर है, but लोगों ने आपको नहीं चुना है ना, लोगों ने जिसको चुना है उनकी priorities अलग है.
Again, I can't agree more with this.
So you hit the wall every time, and yes, sometimes आपको कोई a kindred soul मिल जाएगा, कोई IAS officer मिल जाएगा, वो बोलेगा कि नहीं गौरव सही बोल रहा है, मैं करता हूँ. But उसको भी तो अपने बॉस को कन्विंस करना है, उसको भी तो CM को कन्विंस करना है. And I've lived that life. I'm telling you this because part of why I chose this didn't happen by accident. There was an active decision making that I chose that it's time I work within the government, is because for many years I was trying to advocate for better policies from outside the government, and you realize the amount of time, patience, energy it takes. And it is still worthwhile. If there are no other options, it's still a very worthwhile goal, and it is needed because pressure works. It has its own role. But internally, if you can find, and this is an advice to anyone, that if you can find a political leadership who you believe shares the same policy priorities as you do, there's nothing like it.
No, I can't.
Half bhi nahi, main bolunga 70% of problem is solved.
That is one. We at Samagra have a very, very clear kind of therefore ingredient when we get into a new piece of work, which is political will on that topic. Political will, and we say bureaucratic championship. So these are the two words that we use. Unless until this political will and bureaucratic, there's no point in breaking your head against the wall. You can do that if you don't have any other, as you're saying, this thing that's sustained. But if that is there, then the setup is there, and then you can run with it to get a lot of things done. So I fully relate to what you're saying, and as I'm saying, can't agree more. So that's
number one. Number two, I would say, is endurance. Okay, and I think this would also match well with what probably the work Samagra does, is that you will not be able to predict कि ये 1 महीने में होगा या 1 साल में होगा. And the only thing that will make sure it happens is that आपने उसको पकड़ के रखा है. Somebody gave me this piece of advice many years back when I was outside the government, that think of a lizard, okay, and वो पकड़ के रहता है, अपने प्रे को पकड़ के रखते हैं. You see the नज़र रहती है प्रे के ऊपर, जैसे एक लूज मोमेंट बोला you grab, right? But अगर आपको खड़ा रहना पड़े एक साल भी या 1 महीना भी एक जगह पे, just to wait for that moment, you wait. And as long as you don't take your eyes off your goal, you will probably get what you...
resonates a lot again. We have 6 values of Samag. One of it is what we call perseverance. You're calling it endurance, but that's exactly what...
That's number 2. Third, I would say, is flexibility. So as DDC, we're primarily a think tank, and most of our work happens at the earlier design stages of the policy. But we realize that at the end of the day, once you are dedicated saying कि नहीं ये problem मुझे solve करना है, then you will need to be flexible. If that means that working together with the bureaucracy to provide implementation support. Sometimes we are part of joint committees that do design of tenders or RFPs. Sometimes we do larger consultative exercises at different stages of policy. Sometimes it could be just helping them with specifications of a good web portal, mobile app, जो कुछ करना पड़े. Once whatever you realize, so this is where I think a jack of all things रहना ज़रूरी है, because eventually you want the project to be successful. You want that policy to really take off. And again, we'll come back to the EV policy, which we've spoken a lot about. It was not, and I tell this to anybody who wants to enter the world of policy making. And many times people come and say, "अरे DDC में policy design होती है, मुझे policy design करना है." मैं बोला, I always say that policy design is probably 5, maximum 10% of the game. 90% is in the implementation phase. And if you have no appetite for that, please don't come here.
अब वो सारी बातें बोल रहे हो, it's again making so much sense and resonating. It's the game is implementation. We are a country where we have had, we can have 80% policy and implement it well, we'll still get the outcomes. We can have the best policy and do a shoddy job of implementation, nothing is going to.
And I think that that goes on to say that structures like DDC and probably people who are non-civil servants, they should also have a role in governance, because I think it's these bringing together of skills. A lot of the problems today are much easier in the private sector side, but government mein people are not trained in solving, tech solutions and APIs based. Like ये चीजें उनको समझ में नहीं आती, right? Most of the people, they struggle with it. And it's very easy for us at DDC and people who most of us have a private sector or non-career civil servant background. So problem solving takes a very different shape in DDC versus an average government department.
No, these are all kind of very valuable things. So you're saying align the things with the political priorities. You're saying endurance, perseverance, and then you're saying flexibility, because a lot of the game, flexibility in terms of defining your role, essentially what you're saying.
Yeah, and this holds true for non-profits also, right? That you say that नहीं मेरा काम है advice देना, अब इसके बाद आप implement करो नहीं. I tell this to many non-profits that look, I'm willing to hear your ideas as long as you're going to be part of the implementation and helping them execute, because it's not trivial. Nothing in government is trivial. आपको लगता है कि एक स्टेज के बाद अच्छा अब तो मेरा काम हो गया, now I can relax back. No, it will get stopped at the next layer. So government is just layers within layers within layers, and I cannot put a time limit to when is that going to change. So all you can do is change your own behavior to manage that system.
That makes a lot of sense, Jasmine. अब शिफ्ट करते हैं थोड़ा, and I want to talk about your journey. तो थोड़ा शुरुआत से करते हैं. I think you're from Silvassa, right? तो your name also is little so Shah gives you the एकदम Gujarati this thing. Jasmine doesn't look like. तो एक तो वो भी, and then I think you're from Silvassa this thing, and the only, and that's the sad part of things, but वो GK के books में जब बचपन में पढ़ते थे दादरा नागर हवेली की capital क्या है तो सिलवासा capital है. Beyond that you don't kind of, it's a part of the country that you don't typically, most people wouldn't have gone. So थोड़ा सा a little bit share about your beginnings.
No problem. Well, I'm glad actually, because it still is that quaint little town. I almost, जब मैं सिलवासा का सोचता हूँ तो मुझे मालगुडी की याद आती है. It's that kind of a quaint, almost a romanticized side of a small town. अब थोड़ा बड़ा हो गया है, but when I grew up, I have very, very fond memories. I was born in Bombay. I belong to a Gujarati family. Shah is a giveaway. Extended families in Bombay, but when I was very small, 3 years old, my father set up a small business in, like all Gujaratis do, he set up a small business in Silvassa, and that's where my entire childhood and all my friends and everybody are from Silvassa, Dadar Nagar Haveli. एक ही स्कूल से जूनियर केजी से 12th स्टैंडर्ड पढ़े हैं, and I mean it's as I said, it's almost like a perfect kind of a childhood. Though I do come from a very average middle class kind of a family, grew up for the bulk almost my entire childhood in one bedroom house, kind of a 1 BHK kind of a apartment. Studied in private school. It was one of the better private schools available in Silvassa. But I think at that stage also, I mean, coming from small town India, I didn't have any notions really of what I'm doing or what I will be doing. But for some reason, I always, felt a sense of disappointment. And I realized this, every now and then, कि इंडिया इज़ अ डेवलपिंग कंट्री है ना. जब बचपन में भी सुनता था मुझे बहुत अजीब लगता था कि यार मैं 5 साल 5th स्टैंडर्ड में था तभी भी हम डेवलपिंग है, अब मैं 8th स्टैंडर्ड अभी भी हम डेवलपिंग है, तो मेरे को कोई टारगेट दे दो कि हम कब तक डेवलप बन जाएंगे. एक ये जिद जैसी थी कि आई वांटेड टू अंडरस्टैंड. सो दैट sense of the fact that where is it that as a country we are and why can't we do better has always been lingering in the mind.
And from Silvassa you went to IIT Madras to do your kind of
I was
BTech. So ये जो कीड़ा था, bug था to kind of do something towards nation building, to contribute, ये was from, as you were saying, from the school days.
No, it was
फिर ये बाद में
ना ये कुछ नहीं था. In fact, the entire credit for me getting into IIT Madras goes to my family. I had no grand notion कि मुझे कहाँ पे जाना है. I think I have one elder brother, that's who my family, he lives in US right now, but he really pushed me. He tried for IIT, he didn't get through, but he and my father were really the ones who said कि इसको बकरा बनाना है फैमिली का. तो बहुत पढ़ाया, बहुत टॉर्चर हुआ पढ़ के IIT के लिए, but finally I managed to get through. And at that stage, see, coming from the kind of a background, I was also the first student from Dadra Nagar Haveli to get to any of the IITs. This is about 1999. And हमारे यहाँ तो इनफैक्ट I came from a school where my 11th and 12th standard teachers did not know what is IIT JEE.
अच्छा,
This small town India की reality है. Maybe things have changed now, but that was a reality then. As I said, it was largely my family, and because we had base in Bombay, that we knew what IIT Bombay है and IITs वगैरह. तो dream क्या है? Dream है IIT, तो चलो ठीक है IIT करते हैं. And even for training, I remember in my 11th and 12th standard, every Sunday, I did not enjoy any of the Sunday, because on Sunday, I would take a mail train, travel 3 hours to Bombay to do a 4 to 5 hours coaching of IIT and come back in the night.
अच्छा.
तो सुबह 6 बजे मैं उठता था और रात को 12 बजे घर पहुँचता
So
था.
yes, I'm in Bombay, then studying the coaching and then coming.
कोचिंग कर ली और रात की मेल ट्रेन पकड़ के. सो आई एम immensely in debt of the Indian Railways, I will say, for making that even possible on the kind of a budget. I remember मेरे पास 150 रुपये का मंथली पास हुआ करता था स्टूडेंट डिस्काउंट के साथ. 150 रुपये में आप सोचो उस ज़माने में आपको एक महीने की फ्री राइड्स मिलती थी. तो anyways, I got into IIT, studied mechanical engineering at IIT Madras. I did a dual degree program,
अच्छा, you,
Tech and M.Tech.
I also did a dual degree.
अच्छा. Yours was at IIT Delhi.
Delhi.
हाँ. तो did that, and 2004 में I graduated, and like every dream of every IIT, and most of the IIT, and I would say very few people, at least in IIT Madras में इतना civil service का craze नहीं था. Most of the people would go abroad and do masters or do research.
But this bug was there at the time. उस समय was कहीं अंदर तभी
भी नहीं था.
I mean, my thought process when I used to be at IIT, तो मैं सोचा था कि क्योंकि IIT में we pay very little to study at IIT. It's largely public money through which you're kind of getting the best education. तो मेरे को मुझे लगता था कि मैं ज़्यादा डिस्कस नहीं करता था. मेरे मन में रहता था कि ये like a company and they're shareholders of the company, which is the citizens who are kind of in some sense unknowingly, knowingly investing.
True, absolutely true.
And therefore, one of the basic this thing is that you kind of give back with returns. Right? That's the expectation. तो आप पे bet किया है, आप पे investment करी है, तो आप might as well kind of do something which is kind of in return. So that used to be a very prominent feeling at the time. I would have discussed with 2-3 of my friends, but not a lot. But I just feel अभी भी मुझे लगता है कि वो बात तो सही है.
ये बात सही है, and I think anyone who does, because it is true that in the higher education system of our country, it's heavily subsidized. AIMS देख लो, ये देख लो, and I think there should be some sense of giving back. And I do feel that sooner or later maybe some people do it from some kind of a donation later when you make it big in life and stuff. But that's why I think it's the wrong question to ask, IIT ki karne ke baad, why are you going in another profession? As long as you're contributing back to the society, I think every person is cut out for a different thing.
You went to, from IIT,
I joined, so again, as I said, coming from really a middle class, simple background, the biggest dream after IIT was the donkey naukri lag jaye. And that's the reality. Like for me, that was very important. I did not have the research appetite. Somewhere I always felt that I wanted to work on problems and, active problem solving types. So I got into ITC, one of the campus recruitment, through the campus recruitment, and worked in ITC for 3 years. So the bug is this is when the bug comes. Tabhi bhi, as I said, in IIT also itna bug nahi tha.
But ITC, I think a good part is, like a lot of the other jobs that people get out of IITs, IIMs, is that in a FMCG, this thing, I think in the management training program, whatever they offer at IIT, you end up spending time on the field. So आप area sales manager or
precisely, and that is, I would say, good for me and not so good for ITC. But जो bug मुझे hit हुआ वो तब hit हुआ, and this is the way it happened, and it happened very organically. I will not say that ऐसा कोई एक aha moment था and suddenly मुझे लग गया कि नहीं अब तो मेरा life बदल जाना चाहिए. So see, there is a lot of pride when you come from one of these premier colleges, and IITs being an example. You feel that कुछ भी संभव है, because that's how you're trained. You're trained कि नहीं कुछ भी solve कर सकते हो.
Confidence होता है
कि कुछ बड़ी चीज़ नहीं है. You have to apply yourself at it. And as part of ITC, as you said, they train you across the country. So you travel everywhere. And that was the first time I ever visited UP. The first time I ever visited Bihar. Munger में उनकी बड़ी unit थी, Saharanpur in UP. And I traveled to even corners of Andhra and all of that stuff. It's and I realized it little later that even though I don't come from a rich background, very average middle class background, we still live in a bubble. Yeah. We don't realize
privileged.
थोड़ा privileged तो है कि you don't know what आपको सिर्फ आपके पास क्या नहीं है वो दिखता है, लेकिन देश में you're still in the top, there is the joke in India, right, that top 10% calls itself middle class, but actually the majority of the population is so much worse off. And for me, living that life in ITC, it was a good corporate job. I was traveling a lot, but that's when I really, as I said, face to face,
India.
हुआ कि India है क्या? And to know that our infrastructure is pathetic, governance systems are non-dysfunctional. And I realized कि इतने सारे अच्छे, विद्वानी लोग IIT से गुजरते हैं, तो why is a country like this? You can't be the top-notch talent of the world and your country be in this mode. And that really tore me apart. And it was not, as I said, one instance. It happened over a couple of years at least. Almost to the point that I realized कि it needs to give in. Either I say कि यार ये तो कुछ नहीं हो सकता, or I should give myself one chance. कि देख के what will happen. And I think it was not an easy call, but I realized that it at least worth an attempt to see ki what is the problem, why is it that we are not able to solve. And I was also very clear that a classic example is all the infrastructure. We have traffic, we have our roads are not there are a lot of potholes and stuff. And I realized these are not engineering problems, because as engineers at least you understand these are all इसके तो आंसर 100 साल पहले निकल गए थे कि इसको कैसे fix करना है. So clearly it's a governance and a policy problem. And I think that was a time when I decided that more than anything else, I wanted to see if policy and governance can be a domain where I can move.
This is very interesting, Jasmine, that you say that, because I am a strong believer that once you travel across the country, that's when you really see the real India and things become वो inspiration अपने आप ही आती है. So you did it through ITC and you're saying you did it for 2-3 years. मेरे केस में ऐसा नहीं था. I was working with McKinsey. तो वहाँ पे you don't see real India. So not yet. So then when I kind of moved out, then I traveled for 6 months. मैंने apply एक orientation plan बनाया to kind of see what's to understand how the wheels of governance move. मेरे को पहले से कीड़ा था that policy and governance are the biggest instrument. Politics and governance are the biggest instrument. I used to kind of strongly feel that. Then I traveled for 6 months extensively, seeing work of different organizations, understanding functioning of different organizations. But that was an eye-opening experience. And abhi bhi, everyone that I talk to, I say कि कभी भी मौका लगे, do travel, because just traveling in the country
absolutely
teaches you so much, and you feel कि मतलब वो, as you said ना कि हम तो bubble में रह रहे हैं. We're in
and travel is no filters. Just go out and experience. Somewhere you just have to sort of be ready to soak in. I think that's part of it, and I'm very glad I went through that phase. It was also a phase of huge turmoil, because you are questioning what probably 10-15 years of training. मतलब आप जब से adolescent stage पे होते हैं कि नहीं अच्छी college में जाना है, अच्छी नौकरी ढूंढनी है, suddenly your worldview you're trying to change. So it was a immense internal turmoil. Your family most likely will not understand what's happening. So
then then you kind of made the shift to this impact space, right?
So I did. So at that stage, and I think I was going through that phase. In my case, I had another handicap. I had everybody had a business background. किसी ने, I say that today, किसी ने किसी NGO के साथ volunteer तक नहीं किया था. Forget about working in social NGO space or something. And but one thing I did realize that even at that stage, I said that if at all I want to work here, I would like to be associated with politics, because it was very clear that the scale of change India needs, it is not going to come about just by fixing 5 schools here, 10 schools there, or set up your own NGO or do something. Obviously they do all great work, but I really felt that if I could try and make
especially
change at that level,
move the needle at the scale of the country, right? Then there's no other way. There's no escaping politics.
For a scale, and the good thing about our country is that actually governments have a huge influence. Maybe in some parts of the world you don't have that. You go in African nations, governments are bystander. वहाँ पे international development organizations are running the show there. But वहाँ पे India में ऐसा नहीं है. So governments have a lot of legitimacy, credibility, and resources. And therefore, if you really are passionate about change, you cannot ignore it. Now, the question is, how will you be part of a government and do it? That's the second problem. But let's be clear that वहाँ तक पहुँचना है.
That's the biggest instrument of change. इसमें कोई deny नहीं.
Absolutely. So it just happened, suddenly, and because I was looking for inspiration. At that time, I was hungry and I was trying to find answers, and I tripped across the work of this organization in Bangalore called Janagraha.
Urban governance.
They work on urban policies and urban governance. And मुझे इंटरेस्टिंग लगा क्योंकि बाय अंटिल दैट टाइम बल्क ऑफ द एनजीओज हैड हर्ड वर इनटू डायरेक्ट इम्प्लीमेंटेशन. कोई अपना यहाँ पे कुछ कर रहा है, वो कुछ कर रहा है. दीज पीपल वर वर्किंग टॉकिंग अबाउट फिक्सिंग अर्बन गवर्नेंस through policies. They were very little into front line and implementation. And I found it very intriguing. Also, when you read their work and stuff, and I just showed up there at their office, and I just barged into their office literally and spoke to their founders and said कि मुझे आपको join करना है. I'm like बहुत ही turmoil में हूँ. I really want to experience what is this question of policy and governance. So उन्होंने बोला कि अच्छा, what is your background? अच्छा IIT पढ़ा ये वो. So, but 2 साल 3 साल ही काम किया है, so you don't have any savings. How will you work? Will not be able to afford your salary. I said कि देखो मुझे परवाह नहीं है. 2-3 साल का I want to at least know for myself that because right now I have that passion to experience it. And अगर आप मुझे मना करोगे, I'll go somewhere else. Because their advice was that no, you make your money and then come with all this because this sector doesn't pay so much. So anyways, I went back, spoke to my family, and I had a very supporting brother. I must say that that was one. And family.
How much were you getting paid at ITC and how much at
I was getting around, I think, 1 lakh at that time at ITC, and then Janagraha paid, I think it started with 20K.
20.
So I was
basically subsistence to take care of your...
I remember for almost those 2 or 3 years, I worked with Janagraha in Bangalore. My lunch budget was 25 rupees. 18 रुपीज़ में एक मसाला डोसा आता था और 7-8 रुपये में एक फ़िल्टर कॉफ़ी आती थी. That was 25 rupees fixed budget for lunch. But that was a good time.
But I think the good part, and sometimes I think, and this is important what you're saying, Jasmine, because काफ़ी बार क्या होता है कि people coming out of these institutes and kind of having good educational background, कई बार लगता है कि it's a huge risk. It's a huge opportunity cost. But the other way of looking at it, and at least the way I can share how I looked at it when I made the shift, was that कि यार जो मन है वो करें. We have the biggest safety net in terms of that education. अगर कुछ भी नहीं होगा तो अपना we will take care of ourselves and the family. वो तो कर ही लेंगे ना, उसका कोई टेंशन नहीं है. So therefore, in that sense, the risk is very little.
Yeah.
If you were kind of trying to work in this space, pursue your passion, do that. नहीं होगा तो कुछ नौकरी तो कर ही लेंगे.
No, so I must say 100% I resonated with that, but I must also that the first 3 years that I worked with ITC were very important to get that confidence. Even passing out of a good college, until and unless आपकी एक अच्छी नौकरी नहीं लग जाती, आप कुछ टाइम काम नहीं कर लेते, and you don't feel that sense of appreciation. So in wherever I worked, I mean that appreciation has come. So you know that कल अगर नहीं हुआ कुछ, with an IIT pedigree, with an ITC background, if you are not able to find a job in India, तो मतलब
तो अगर आप हमें
क्या होगा
नहीं पड़ेगी तो फिर then
exactly. So if you are not willing to take the risk, you ask the question, who else will be willing to take the risk? And but again, as I said, a supportive family is still essential. But first and foremost, वो हिम्मत तो आपके अंदर ही आनी चाहिए कि एटलीस्ट ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा क्या होगा, 1-2 साल, within a couple of years, you will realize that are you cut out for this space and uncertainty. Obviously, at somewhere you also have to manage your lifestyle. That goes without the saying.
Yeah.
But I think the rewards that you stand to gain are immense.
And also, I would say आज की तारीख में वो risk भी कम है. It's changing. It's kind of getting kind of less and less kind of this thing riskier because there are more pathways, there are more opportunities, even the space, the pay is better. Everything is kind of...
I mean, the risk is risk of going into the unknown, right? Because you know that everyone around you, your batchmates and everybody, सबको cut out है. हमारे यहाँ भी था ITC के बाद एक Harvard Business School या Stanford गए, उसके बाद एक hedge fund, equity fund, कुछ. So that's the path. You know that is a rat race, and I really, in fact, that rat race was a word that stuck in me at that time. That if my life is so predictable that I know that 10 साल बाद मैं क्या करूँगा, it's not worth living that life.
In fact, I am reminded of this, somebody saying that it's a rat race. So even if you win the race, you're still a rat. It's not to extreme this thing, but yeah, that's the... So it's kind of get out of the rat race and create your own this thing. So you did that in Janagraha. How was the experience? And
it was fantastic. And I think the single biggest learning that I had, and for everybody who's listening to this, any young person, is that if you have taken the decision to make the plunge, the one thing to look for is mentorship. More than अरे ये NGO का job कितना pay करेगा, मेरा personal मेरे को क्या काम करवा रहे हैं वगैरह वगैरह. You see who are the people you are going to be working with, and are there enough opportunities of growth and learning from these people? Yeah. And I'm very fortunate. Both the founders of Janagraha, Ramesh and Swati Ramanathan, are exceptional public leaders. They have their own life story about, they lived their entire professional life. and then shifted and started Janagraha. But tremendous, by that time they had almost been working for, I think, 8 to 10 years in public space. They were already advising the government of India. So for me, as somebody, even meeting people who are advising the government, I was in awe. But I could identify that, I could learn a lot. And I think that really did happen. In the midst of it, I also was fortunate that, I was associated with a big public campaign, the Jago Re voting campaign, that is an idea that I had.
2009 election.
2009 election.
Yeah.
Like, कोई ad आती थी टाटा
Yes,
टी की,
Tata tea.
कि अगर आप चाय पियो और जागो and go to voting and stuff. So
So
there
get
was a
more and
campaign.
more people to vote. That
That was a good, yeah. So that happened at Janagraha. Tata Tea became a partner, and they were very flexible with getting young people to come take leadership, support them and stuff. So I think those 3 years, and at that time I also was involved in some initial, I would say, what happens in the rings of policy making. So for 3 months I was sitting out of Nirman Bhavan, working on JNNURM, Jawaharlal Nehru National University.
Urban Renewal
Worked with the Joint Secretary to Government of India. That was the first time I stepped and sat in a public, in government office, and देखना कि काम कैसे होता है वहाँ पे. So just broke some of these barriers, and I realized that because see, as you said, कि एक cynicism होता है कि चीज़ें इतनी खराब है, आपको बाहर से लगता है कि यार एक बंदा क्या ही कर पाएगा. But once you realize, when you have mentors, when you have role models in front of you, that here are 1 or 2 individuals जिन्होंने लग के 5 साल में एक बड़ी चीज़ करी है, and that's how a society changes, that's how a country changes. And do you see in yourself that wherewithal to spend all those years and hours? Public change, that's a beauty. We are a democracy.
No, I again resonates a lot. Ki the thing that matters is mentorship, learning, opportunities, exposure, and again, I don't want to do too many plus ones to what you're saying, because then people listening will say same ही बात करे जा रहे हैं, the same thing. But
But I think we have a lot common in our background.
yeah. तो उसके बाद जनागढ़ के बाद Jasmine, you went to do your masters in public administration from Columbia, right? CPA, right? You
That's
kind of went there, and again there I have a question, and there's a question that a lot of youngsters keep asking inside our organization also. So I'll tell you what I typically this thing I want to understand from you. How did you find that experience, and how useful it has been subsequently? My thing is, it's not an obvious choice the way I look at it. It's a call that one should take depending on what they are currently doing. मेरा ये response रहता है जब लोग आते हैं और बोलते हैं कि masters के लिए जाना है, then what do you think? So my thing is, it's not a given that you should go for a public policy masters. Yes, there's a lot to learn there. There's no denying that. But also see what you're doing. There's a opportunity cost. If you're doing something really relevant, meaningful, and you're kind of learning in it, you are kind of creating impact with the government. Our work is all with the government. Then it's not an obvious choice to say that you have to do. You be very clear that what are you going there for, and what you kind of want to get from your masters. We also have a program that we now run called Vidya, where we support people who are at Samagr who want to go and do their masters in public policy or even MBA from different places, and we co-sponsor a little bit so that they are able to get back, because loan bahut hota hai. And you then tend to stay for a few years after that there. So just to kind of, for people who are committed and want to come back, we kind of do that also. But in general, mera rehta hai ki it's not necessary. What's your view on this? When people
I will first second that it's not a must-have. It's not absolutely necessary that if you have to make change in India, you have to be. I mean, you look at some of the most prominent names who you will associate, they've never been there. Is it desirable? I would say yes. And the reason I say it is actually, and I'll just talk from my own experience, that, I went because I realized that, see, if you know that you want to dedicate yourself to lifetime in this space, I just felt that I had inadequate set of tools to work in this space. I trained as an engineer. तो आप मुझे इंजीनियरिंग में कहीं भी डाल दो, ठीक है, मैं अगले 20-25 साल 30 years of your lifetime you can spend. But otherwise, what are you doing in public space? You are always working on first principles, ना? आप ठीक है, analytically you are sharp, आपको 1 + 1 = 2 समझ में आता है. How far will that take you? Is the question that I asked myself in the mind, and I felt that if the opportunity and the right circumstances come together, it is desirable. And one huge reason, and I think you talked about the financial aspect to it, and which I think many young people need to understand, is that please do not put yourself into a $100,000 loan if you have to, Because if you do that, what it means is then you'll have to work for a few years.
You lose total 5 years before you can be back. And
Exactly. 2 साल आपकी पढ़ाई के, 5 साल आपको फिर कमाने के लिए. You can look at it in another way कि नहीं चलो मुझे international work experience मिलेगा, then that's fine. That's a different ball game. मेरे लिए it was very clear that heart has always beaten for India. You know, I was not focused on international development, World Bank, कहीं पे ऐसे काम करना. And I was like, I want to work each and every minute of my life on issues of my country. And I was very fortunate that I got a Fulbright fellowship. So the entire education was funded by taxpayers. In this case, it was 50% Indian taxpayers and 50% American taxpayers.
So और sense of responsibility और ज़्यादा
बोझ थोड़ा पड़ गया है दिल के ऊपर, but no, in a good way. So I went there, and I must say that, you know, the reason why I feel is desirable, I feel 50% of what I gained from that master's in public administration course at Columbia was within the classroom. 50% was because I was living in a developed country. Let me just say that, you know, somewhere, you know, I think what happens is you start questioning your entire way of life once you going there as a visitor or as a tourist in a foreign destination is very different. अगर आप वहाँ पे रह रहे हो, आप daily अपने bills pay कर रहे हो, it's a different experience. And the first thing that hit me, Gaurav, was that मैं यहाँ से वहाँ shift हुआ, मुझे एक दिन लगा my entire apartment was set up. Everything, electricity connection, this, that. मैं वहाँ से जब इंडिया वापस आया, मुझे 1.5 से 2 महीने लगा. मेरा phone connection, मेरा gas connection. And that tells you, you know, that sometimes it needs to hit you hard, it needs to hit you personally to know that how much distance we have to travel. There are many things we have done well as a nation. But until you have a lived experience of living abroad, especially for people who are in this change, you know, public change ki space mein.
The difference in the ease of
the difference. And I think there are layers to it. It's about how their culture, you know, what their culture is, about many things. How their media, for example, operates, you know, being able to sort of see their media. Because at the end of the day, because you're in this public change, you're not just bothered about policy. There is politics, there is media, there is legal system. Like, this is the confluence of all this is what affects the society. Yeah. And I think that is where being able to live and spend a few years abroad fundamentally changes you in some different ways. And I'm very fortunate for that experience. Of course, within the classroom, as I said, it gives you certain toolkit to maybe just understand. And बात भी, I mean, एक हिसाब से सही है कि what you are going through, probably you're not the only country going through a certain set of challenges, right? There are many other developing countries. There are many other, if you look at what London or New York was 100 years back, they faced, you know, the open sewers, garbage landfills, so they have solved that problem. And you sometimes take inspiration, sometimes take ideas. So I would say, on the whole, one advice I always tell people is don't do because it's a good title on your CV. Okay, that's the last reason you should do it. Do it after you spend at least a few years in India, so that you have, you know, well-defined questions. What is the knowledge you are going to seek? Because unlike Indian programs, they are not tailored programs. Yeah. Right? आपको जाके, in fact, this idea was very new to me कि आप वहाँ पे आपको 4 या 5 courses ही लेने होते हैं. And उसमें से हमारे at least the CIPA program had maybe 1 course was a core course. तो बाकी 4 course आपको select करने हैं. And उसके लिए there's something called shopping. Okay, first 2 weeks of every semester, there are 200 courses में से आपको 4-5 लेने हैं. So you actually sit down with your entire catalog and you say कि अच्छा ये 20 मेरे को interesting लग रहे हैं. So you go and attend one class in each of them. So that idea of you are curating your own experience is very new.
And you cannot do that till the time you have some experience and you understand.
Exactly. And you have the questions well framed in your mind. I mean, in my case, I ended up taking classes at the Columbia Journalism School, Law School, Political Science School, Urban Planning School. CIPA पे मैंने 50-60% courses लिए होंगे, and that's what a good university like a good US university gives you. I mean, a plethora of resources.
Great. So you had a good experience there, and then from there you went to JPAL. Right?
That's right.
And JPAL in New York itself, you said?
Boston. So
Boston. JPAL is an case.
It's part of MIT there. Yeah. So I mean, I was very clear. I wanted to come back and work in India, but I also wanted to work in an organization, because until then I had worked in urban governance kind of a space, and I wanted to work in an organization that widened my horizon in terms of widened my understanding of policies and across different domains. JPAL is a very unique institution in the sense that it's a collection of the topmost development economists in the world who are using very scientific and rigorous methods to find answers on across domains, so which are the best education policies, health policies, what work comes to economic empowerment, pollution, kuch bhi. And I found that very interesting as an approach. And it sort of somewhere, because coming from an engineering, analytical, IIT background, यहाँ impact को भी आप precisely measure कर सकते हो, क्या बात है, so I was like, yeah, I was quite fascinated by that approach. The work of Professor Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, at that time I think they had just written the book Poor Economics. 2010-11 में शायद वो launch हुई थी. 2012 में I graduated, so that book was very popular. So I read it at that time and I found it very fascinating. And it was again good luck. Again here I think it's another thing that JPAL's largest office was in Delhi. Okay, so I realized at that point in time that it's a good organization. I'll learn a lot. Again, your lever always is that what will I learn? Who will I learn from? For me, always that's been the paramount thing. And I realized that JPAL was a good option. Second, it was a good way for me to come back to India because they were hiring for an international position. I went regardless, but I told them that, look, I will work maximum for 1 year. I don't have any joy of sitting and working in US. I'll join only if you shift me to your Delhi office in the year 2. And they did not advertise their position like that, but they heard me, they selected me, and they said, fine, we will.
Got it. One question on not JPAD in particular, but in general measurement, right? It gets a lot talked about in development world in this space that how do you measure impact and so on. JPAD is one of the organizations at the forefront of it through RCTs. There's another school of thought which says that it's not just one thing. RCT is basically randomized controlled trial when you say, okay, this is the control group, this is the treatment group, you do certain intervention on this group, and then you see the difference and you establish the effect of the intervention, everything else remaining the same. There's another school of thought which is, let's say, the Land Pritchett and others in Oxford who say that it's a combination of things, especially in governance, that are at play.
Yeah.
Get a certain outcomes, very difficult to attribute is intervention ke karan ye outcome ho raha hai and all of that. You have now been a practitioner for last 6-7 years in government.
Yeah.
So ये दोनों worlds को मतलब is that how much of that is really applicable in practical governance? Yes, measurement is important. There's no denying that. But that kind of rigorous measurement, rigorous kind of analysis, ये practical उससे कितना marry हो पाता है? And
see, I think it's important to understand that इसमें कुछ either or approach is not the way to think about it. I think the contribution of RCTs to the world of development is to be able to establish a gold standard. And gold standard का मतलब ही ये है कि yes, the scientific rigor of RCT is undisputed. Our entire world of medical science is built around being able to do precise randomized trials. When it comes to policy, obviously there are many variables, and different human systems, different governance systems work differently. But if you can do an RCT, if the factors are such that it gives you the opportunity to do an RCT will still give you more than anything else a precise answer to whether a certain policy works or not. Since I worked for 4 years at JPAL never advocates that RCT karo ya aur kuch mat karo, right? So even for practitioners at my end, we work with JPALs of the world, we work with other organizations of the world. But yes, to the extent, I think maybe as a normal government servant or a bureaucrat, you may not have the incentive. But people like us who have, I think, a larger goal that we want to be able to fundamentally impact and fundamentally bring about change, it'll be good for us also to know कि कितना impact आया है. And therefore, I think if more practitioners have developed that research mindset and more researchers also understand the practitioner's constraint, I think वो मिलन तब होगा. You'll actually generate knowledge which is real world.
Yeah.
And that has been the contribution. If you look at some of the interventions like teaching at the right level of JPA, I mean, we know India mein most of our children at the primary school, even at standard 5 children cannot read a standard 2 textbook. And JPAL has actually done a lot of rigorous work with Pratham, which was part of the Nobel Prize citation in 2019. And Delhi government has adopted that. Delhi government has a mission, Bunyad, running for the last 4 years or so, which is based on that program. So yes, that approach will not be a fit everywhere, and many times you'll have to go to alternate approaches. But there is a role that they play, and I feel in an arsenal of a practitioner, being able to, as much excitement
deploy that tool as in when it can be, or some variations of this. Or
absolutely, but at least have that measurement mindset that जो भी कुछ आप कर रहे हो, let's just keep tracking what it is rather than going by anecdotal. Politicians can just be happy with anecdotes, but at the end of the day, you really want change. So you want to be able to.
Well, there's no denying that data-backed this thing measurement is critical. It's more about how much of that rigor that you can get. And you're saying that again you have to have that in your toolkit.
Yes.
And you can see कि कहाँ पे उसको deploy करना है. Let's now come to the how did you land up at DDC, right? So to JPAL हो गया, you shifted to India, you shifted to the Delhi office of JPAL, you were working there.
Yeah.
So how did you now land up?
See, as I let me go back to when I had moved out from ITC job, and at that time itself I told you that I at that stage itself I realized that the scale at which the change is required, politics needs to change in this country, and I was always obviously at that time largely there were BJP and Congress as the major forces. For whatever reason, there was never a strong attraction towards either. When I was in the story of my association with the AAP government and Delhi government started when I was in US and when the entire India Against Corruption movement happened. And after that, I think when the government in Delhi was formed in 2015, and you saw people from completely different walks of life becoming first-time MLAs. These are people, koi software engineer tha, koi journalist tha. In the case of Mr. Arvind Kejriwal, he was an IRS officer, right? So, I think anybody who works in this space can only survive if there's a bit of romanticism, right? You want these breakout moments in history where you suddenly feel that, yaar, possibilities galore hai, kuch bhi kar sakte hain. And I think that 2015 moment, when the Aam Aadmi Party won with 67 out of 70 seats. And more importantly, when a lot of people from middle class background suddenly became ministers and, that brought in me a lot of optimism.
You were at the time?
I was at time in Delhi, but I had no association. I had no association with the government or with the Aam Aadmi Party. But I had been tracking the India Against Corruption movement, and I always looked at it as one of the most significant developments that happened in Indian politics in my lifetime.
So you were supporting it like a...
I was a well-wisher.
People were doing and a lot of people were...
I was a well-wisher. I was never... Because at that time, मैं तो US में था. मैं 2013 के end में, जब December 2013 में पहला चुनाव हुआ था and there was a coalition government formed, I would just entered Delhi back from US at that time. So I was setting up my base in Delhi, working at JPAL, all of that. जब 2015 में सरकार बनी with that kind of a mandate, and I remember within a month, the first budget was presented, and the then Deputy Chief Minister and the Education Minister of Delhi, Mr. Manish Sisodia, announced that we are doubling the education budget,
25%.
And 25%. So Delhi still is the only state in the country which allocates 25% of its budget to education. But जब 2015 में किया, तब 12.5 से सीधा 25 ले गए. No state has done that. And for many people who, like me, who appreciated AAP's politics, for us that was also a moment of truth. That here's a party that was willing to walk the talk. देखो कहना आज कौन सी political party कहेगी कि नहीं हम schools नहीं चाहते हैं. But you ask them how much do they allocate? No, not more than 10 to 12%. Delhi government under the Aam Aadmi Party has been allocating 25%. So when they made this announcement for the first time, by that time I was leading the policy office of JPAL in India, and incidentally JPAL had done the most work in the field of education. We had almost 10-15 years of research from India as well as around the world as to what works in improving primary education, education outcomes, attendance, all of that. So जैसे ये हुआ announcement, I felt it's a good opportunity to go approach the government and tell them that we have certain inputs and ideas on what you can do with that money, right, at the end of the day. So we sought a meeting, and very interestingly, Gaurav, you must have approached and worked with many governments. Normally जब आप meeting मांगते हो तो bureaucrat मिलता है, वो भी बेला फुसला के बहुत हाथ जोड़ने पड़ते, तो आधा घंटा 1 घंटा की मीटिंग होती है. मिनिस्टर तो जब आपको रिबन काटना होता है तब होता है. So in this case, I remember at that time Atishi, who was the current education minister, was the advisor to Mr. Sisodia, and through some connects, I got an appointment of 10 minutes with Atishi. So before that, Atishi is generally very well prepared, one of the most organized people I have met in my life. So she had read about JPAL and she was like, I mean, you guys are fantastic. You guys have done a lot of work. So 10 minute, 1 घंटे की meeting में हूँ. And she was very clear that you have a lot of good suggestions and we should not waste any time. Give me 2-3 days. We'll set up a meeting with the minister. I said, चलो ठीक है, maybe 15-20 minute meeting होगी minister से. But we were prepared. We came with a full deck. That meeting, I remember, the date was July 5th, 2050. That meeting went on for 3 hours. We met. It was with Mr. Manish Sisodia, with the education secretary. So first of all, I was surprised the education. I thought maybe just the minister will meet. Maybe she was just the advisor. The education secretary was there. The finance secretary was there. Atishi was there as the advisor, and the minister was there. 3 घंटे की मीटिंग चली. Me as well as the executive director of JPAL, हम दोनों थे, हमारी टीम थी. We had never had a meeting like that so far. By the time I had worked with 10 state governments in India, normally आधा 1 घंटा के ज़्यादा, because it's research, unless you engage with it, you will not grab it. In this case, it was Mr. Sisodia who was asking the maximum questions. He was really engaging with कि नहीं ये करने से बच्चे क्यों पढ़ेंगे या ये नहीं करेंगे. So he really got it. And I think that day and that moment for me was a bit of it made the change, that I felt that not only the heart is in right place, but you have that really the intent to walk the talk types कि आपको कैसे करना है. आप जूझ रहे हो वो सवालों से जो नहीं, मतलब people feel it's easy, अगर इतना easy होता तो चीज़ें बदल जाती ना. Schools इसलिए बदले हैं क्योंकि Mr. Manish Sisodia along with abled advisors like Atishi have slogged for 6 to 8 years, had hundreds of such conversations, sought knowledge from the entire world, engaged people. JPAL today is a partner, Pratham is a partner, many other good organizations. तब जाके ये बदला हुआ है.
So then what happened after that? So you did.
So I got connected. I think so by the way, that meeting set the agenda of multiple programs that are still going on in Delhi government. That was a defining meeting. Many new ideas that we discussed finally found shape in some program or policy in Delhi government. But I also, because I was a well-wisher of AAP, and I informed them that, look, if there are any other areas of policy support, because my background was not politics then. Now I straddle both the worlds, but I told them that any other policy areas, I am there, even in my personal capacity. If it is outside the RCT zone, if you want me to work and help on something, I am very happy to. And they needed it because they came with a huge mandate, 70-point massive manifesto, and they really didn't have a big team. So for 1 year, I volunteered.
While still being at JPAL,
I would assist them on policy support from outside and stuff like that.
And you would work in the process with whom?
With largely Mr. Sisodia and Atishi and their team, the Office of Deputy Chief Minister of Delhi government. That was my entry point. And after a year, I think काफी areas में to and fro हुआ. And after a year, I think Mr. Sisodia said that, I think ये बाहर से ज्ञान देना बहुत हो गया. If you're really serious, I think people like you should be inside the government. तो मैं बोला मैं कैसे आऊँगा अंदर? इसे कि पहले तुम मन बना लो, रास्ता निकल जाएगा. तो फिर मैंने वही किया, मैंने मन बना लिया, and I started working first as an advisor in the office of Mr. Sisodia. Worked on outcome budgeting, worked on some education reforms.
Like Atishi was there, you were also you kind of got in that, and then you kind of.
And then I after that for a year, for 2 years I worked as an advisor, first with Mr. Sisodia, then with Mr. Kailash Gehlot, who was the transport minister. तो 2016 के एंड में मैंने ज्वाइन किया था. 2018 के एंड में I was appointed to this position as Vice Chairperson of DDC.
So earlier there was, I think, it started with Mr. Ashish Khaitan.
Yeah, Ashish Khaitan was the first Vice Chairperson.
Yeah, उसके बाद
मैं.
उसके बाद directly it was you, right?
So since then I've been doing that as far as the governance is concerned, and obviously I think one thing led to the other, and I also now am very active member of the Aam Aadmi Party as well.
This is fascinating, Jasmine, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, again, a lot of professionals listening to this will say, okay, this is it's a dream that Jasmine is living. So it's almost like that.
It is.
I'm sure you have that sense also that you would have not, see, when you start, you don't imagine. But these are things that happen as you kind of go along. You narrated the full story of it. But what's your sense today?
Well, if you ask me if I would have changed anything in my past, I would not. I'm immensely grateful. I think part of it is also you put yourself out there in a zone which is unsure, but that is when magic happens sometimes, right? So you need to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
I come exactly from that risk-averse middle-class background, and I think I may have been foolish then when I said that I'll give up my nice cushiony ITC job as a 23-year-old, 24-year-old. A lot of people around me did say you are foolish. But you do that. You give yourself a chance. And ठीक है, हुआ तो हुआ, वरना नहीं हुआ. And as I said, one thing did lead to the other. And there's nothing miraculous in what my journey has been, I must say. Yes, I must say that in the non-profit world, there are many opportunities. First, that's one good thing to know, that because coming in this space was the second level of risk that, career-wise if you say. यहाँ पे कुछ नहीं है, चलो, today the opportunities, philanthropy, international foundations, there are a lot of organizations working in India, and if you come with the right background, अगर आपने थोड़ी पढ़ाई भी कर ली है, let's say public administration, public policy, you can have a comfortable career. There's no doubt about it. But if you really want to aspire for something like this, I can only say that look for governments, look for, and in this case, because I know Aam Aadmi Party, there are people, you will not realize, but these are the same people who were like you maybe few years back. They got a break, and I'll give you an example of the Aam Aadmi Party government in Punjab. You look at the background of MLAs and the minister. In fact, the person who defeated the sitting chief minister of Punjab, Mr. Chani, he used to run a mobile repair shop. Somebody else used to run a cycle tire repair shop. Today they have, become there. So they will identify with you. You have to put yourself out there. अगर आप घर पे बैठ के सोचोगे कि नहीं यार ये मुश्किल लग रहा है, तो फिर कुछ भी मुश्किल लगेगा. Go out there, meet people, put yourself out there, be willing to take a little bit of risk. But I think there are plenty of opportunities.
Yes. And I know that you're also creating those opportunities for young professionals to experience governance, and you've started the Chief Minister's Urban Leader Fellows, CMULF, and we had the chance to interact on that.
That's how we first met.
That's how we first met.
I don't know if your listeners do know about that program.
Yeah, so I think you can explain a little bit, but I think those things help, right? Because they give that window of exposure to a young professional to see the government from the inside, and that can be kind of that moment of reckoning or game-changing thing for a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
You could quickly explain.
No, absolutely. And I think what Janagraha did for me, gave me a 2 to 3 year experimental phase. It's important कि जब आप ये सोच रहे हो तो don't think much. जाओ, opportunity है, 2 साल काम करके आओ, see if you like it or not.
Yeah.
And because I have lived that experience, I wanted to create space for more and more people. So we have a CM fellowship program in Delhi government where outstanding individuals, I'm telling you, we get 6,000 to 8,000 applications for 20 seats. Outstanding people apply, they work for 2 years. Each of them is assigned to an office of a minister, and they get a ringside view of how policies
are. All of them are now assigned to office of minister?
Office of minister. Okay. All of them are assigned different ministers. But not just that, one other thing that we have done is in DDC itself, we have created a formal structure where a lot of lateral entrants can come in. People who have worked in the development space for, let's say, 5 years, 10 years. So we have created a structure where we have advisors, we have joint advisors, we have deputy advisors.
Very similar to also NITI has also done some stuff.
Exactly. We have modeled it along similar lines. And the idea is that people, talent from outside, and you see this in the West, that वहाँ पे जब एक administration बदलता है, then bunch of people from private sector enter the government. They come with their own talent, they are passionate, they identify with the political agenda, and they work as long as this government is there. ये मुझे एक ही नौकरी पूरे जिंदगी भर करनी है. Why are we obsessed with that? And I think this is what I think Indian government should do more and more. We've tried doing it in our own level. We have small fellowships, 2-3 of such fellowships for very young early stage professionals. But then we have these structures in DDC where people with 5, 10, 15 years of experience in the development sector can come and work for 3 to 5 years at a reasonable.
And how many of such lateral folks are working at DDC?
No, so we just revamped our entire structure. So we have created positions for 40 such people to work out of DDC. The hiring and recruitment will.
And how's been, one thing I didn't ask through all of this is, how's been the experience of working with Mr. Arvind Kejriwal, with the Chief Minister? How's that? What do you kind of have learned, seen? What's been that experience like?
See, I told you that at different stages of my life, one of the things that I've really been fortunate about is to have role models and mentors to look up to. Earlier, at Janagraha, it was the founders there. At an organization like JPAL, of course, to work with Nobel laureates, now, tab nahi the, but obviously, but I think the quality of work they were doing, everybody knew that they were going to get it, and it's great that they eventually did get it. For me, being able to work with Mr. Manish Sisodia and Mr. Arvind Kejriwal has been the highlight of the last 6 years that I've spent in the Delhi government and as part of Aam Aadmi Party. With Mr. Arvind Kejriwal, I think he's possibly the most unique politician in the sense that he extremely political sharp, right? Political savviness में 100 में से 200 point कमा लेंगे, because to have a party like Aam Aadmi Party working under the nose of the central government in Delhi and to be sustained and to be in power and still win 62 out of 70 seats. So you have been able to deliver and keep the party grow stronger and obviously become a national party in 10 years. हुआ नहीं है देश की history में. but at the same time have a tremendous knack for governance and policies and the nuance of policies. I mean, today there is a Delhi model that is being acknowledged. Education, nobody thought that government schools will ever become better than private schools in India. I've never heard this happening, but Delhi ने ये कर दिखाया. Healthcare का एक model है. Environment में I told you about how there's been 30% improvement. Lot of good work happening. I mean, free bijli, free pani, for women.
No, but if you share the learnings that you have had by working with him, right? The reason I'm asking is all things that you're saying.
See, there are some things,
but what things not? Because you're working with him on a very close basis. So what are the things that you've observed or learned basically through that experience?
Okay, so I think it's difficult to pinpoint. First is, I think, just the sheer sense of prioritization that he has. Okay, somebody like him who is running a national party, being the chief minister of one state, also now thinking about 2024, and he still calls and says कि अच्छा इस policy में ये clause क्यों था? Okay, and I don't want to sound that this is, but it comes from a sense of prioritization. Yeah. You know that at the end of the day, and many times, when I challenge people who work with me, young fellows work, and very easily they feel they're overwhelmed. मैं बोलता हूँ अगर तुम overwhelmed हो तो सोचो अरविंद केजरीवाल कितना overwhelmed है. So you have no excuse to say कि I cannot take more. It's all about how you can really soak it up. So his sense of being able to grasp an issue, understand the key thing, and being able to decide quickly, I think it's exceptional from what I have seen. He's really a person, first of all, who stretches in terms of the sheer energy and the human capability of how much you're on it all the time. मैं नहीं बोलूँगा कि 24 घंटे में से 4 घंटे सोते हैं, but I would say that, relentless, single-minded pursuit. It's difficult, I would say, to pinpoint what all other, for me, it's an enigma. I work
at it. Being always at it, relentless is the word that
relentless.
And I think prioritization.
Many people who work with Mr. Arvind Kejriwal, I think they'll say that he's an enigma. We work so closely with him, but the sheer he stretches the I would say the notion of what humanly capable jo hota. And I think it's motivating to you that you feel that there's so much more that you can do. आपके पास 24 घंटे आपको लगता है कि आप हम सब overwhelmed हैं, but no, there is like you barely scratched. When you look at people who have
these days being overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed, work-life balance. I mean, I'm not trivializing these things, but you really have to work with people.
What are the limits of that, basically?
Absolutely. And I would say the last bit I would say is courage. In the face of the kind of constraints, it would be very easy for many people to throw in a towel. The political attacks through ED, CBI aside, इवन द गवर्नेंस में दिल्ली जितना चलाना मुश्किल है, मेरे ख्याल से देश क्या दुनिया में ऐसा कोई मेट्रोपॉलिटन सिटी नहीं होगा which would be
there's a constant tussle with the government. Constant tussle. Then you have the NCD also, which was not with you for the longest time of this.
Now we have that.
Now you have
so that makes it a little easy. But the moment you feel it becomes easy, some new curveball comes. And right now, as we speak today, the Rajya Sabha is debating the Delhi bill, which basically says that आप मुख्यमंत्री किसको भी चुन लो. Finally, the bureaucrats will listen only to the central government. So, and it's unfortunate, we feel that somewhere at the end of the day, you've elected someone. Today it is Arvind Kejriwal. Tomorrow it can be anyone else. In a democracy, a person you've elected should have the powers to, at least call the shots. And and I think somewhere wo environment and pollution wale munde pe bhi ye ho jata hai ki somewhere politics trumps what is good for the nation. And which is a very dangerous trend. Even democracies go through it, and it's a very dangerous trend.
Last question, Jasmine. What's your message to the people watching this, to the youth in particular, to the young professionals? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say dream high, right? You have to really, somewhere it might feel that the scale of the problem, देश तो इतना बड़ा है, इतनी बड़ी चीज़ें हैं, कैसे होगा, क्या होगा? You need to have patience. You need to start somewhere. I mean, in my case, if I were to think 15 years back, I did not know I would be here and doing what I'm doing now. But at least find the right mentors, be willing to take a little bit of risk. But I would say that the opportunities are immense today. If you are going to be at it, there is obviously a premium for knowledge, right? Make sure that you're constantly working on yourself. You're gaining new skills, gaining new knowledge. but at the end of the day, it's hard work, it's perseverance, and just being courage to stay the course,
Yeah.
in the long term. This is a long term, it's a marathon, right? It's a career change that many of you might be willing, but I think your example, my example, and there are many others today. I think slowly many of these stories are coming that we decided to do against the odds. And we wouldn't be doing this if we were unhappy. So there's no reason for you not to try. Chalo, attempt kiya, nahi acha laga, that's a different thing.
Yeah.
But to say कि I will not have never tried, never succeeded, as they say, right? So अगर आप try नहीं करोगे तो फिर आगे की क्या बात?
Great. Thank you, Jasmine. Pleasure talking to you.